I actually was working at a convention recently and like saw a dude who got like an entire Hokusai block print tattooed all on it. Like his entire front was just a Hokusai painting, and like including his, like from his chin, I assume, down to his balls, and like belly button, everything, nipples tattooed and everything. I was like, that is hardcore. And it's like even more insane that like this dude is like 5'6" and like has his entire front like completely blasted.
Wait, the dream of the fisherman's wife?
Yep.
Oh my God, okay, yeah. Brian!
Okay. Well, so I want to dial into that for just a moment, because for those not familiar, the dream of the fisherman's wife is arguably the first tentacle porn image ever made.
Yes. She's not being penetrated by the tentacles, but there is an octopus eating a woman out.
Yeah.
I mean, like, in this day and age, you couldn't make the dream of the fisherman's wife because of woke. The tentacles would have to be pixelated.
You're goddamn right. You're goddamn right.
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
Welcome to the Worst of All Possible Worlds, the first and only podcast that will stay the same regardless of woke. I'm the worst of all possible Joshes.
I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
And I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
We're very excited today because we've got a cool guest. You've already heard a little bit from him talking here about tattoos. He is the co-host of Beneath the Skin, which is a podcast about the history of everything, as told through the history of tattooing. You may also know him from Lions Led by Donkeys, which is a podcast about great failures in military history. Welcome, Tom O'Mahony.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here talking about the origins of Japanese tentacle porn and Catholic sin.
Yeah. And how those two are intertwined in surprising ways.
Yeah, it's really the same thing.
This is why the missionaries didn't take hold in Japan, is like they just did not understand the artistic merit of octopus eating pussy.
They were all too busy trying to evangelize for their famous position.
Mm-hmm.
The missionaries.
Oh.
Do you get it? Because they weren't. It wasn't like going.
Yeah, no, and the octopus and the fisherman's wife. They're not doing that position.
No, they're not. They're doing something entirely different. And we're doing something entirely different today. Well, actually not that different. We've done this kind of thing before, but...
We've done a Metroidvania
We've done a Metroidvania. We've done the Metroidvania, right? We've done Castlevania Symphony of the Night.
Sure. We haven't done Metroid.
But today, what we're going to be talking about is a really cool game that sort of comes from that heritage. It's called Blasphemous II. And Tom, you were calling it like the most not Catholic game ever made or something along those lines?
Oh, it rules so much. Like the whole like world building is like super based in Spanish medieval and Renaissance Catholicism, a lot of like influence from Sevilla where it's made in Spain, but just like I haven't played a game like this aside from like some FromSoft games where like the world building is just like so beautifully consistent throughout the art design and the gameplay and the story, and it's just like, oh, what if God hates you but is also kind of cool?
Yeah. I would argue that this is also a new kind of genre that is entering the foray, which is a Metroidvania, but it's also a Dark Souls Metroidvania, which is becoming a lot more popular. I remember playing like Sultan Sanctuary, which also has a lot of Catholicism baggage hanging over it. That is also a Dark Soulsy.
I mean, Dark Souls itself has a lot of Catholicism in it because of how it's sort of weeaboo for the West kind of thing, right? It gets very specific in its architecture, in its inspirations from European things, but also just in its own distinct JRPG kind of way.
Castlevania by that same token, right? But Tom, we were having a chat last time I was over in London, and you had raised the idea of doing an episode. You showed me actually some footage of the game, and it's like, I saw the aesthetic, I saw sort of what the gist of the thing was, and I was like, oh, hell yeah, we could talk about this. So what is it about this game that really grabs you?
I think, like, I'm supposed to talk about the first one. Like, the game really grabbed me because, like, I enjoy games that are really fucking difficult, but not in the sense that, like, they're difficult in bullshit ways, like as I was explained to someone recently, that like Dark Souls isn't actually that difficult. It just has a high learning curve, and once it clicks, the game is quite easy. And the same with Blasphemous, although I do have some nitpicks about it, mainly the movement, which I assume we'll talk about later on. But it was just like, it was like the perfect marriage of everything that I look for in a game. That like difficult, has like kind of a not necessarily dark fantasy, but like that Souls-esque aesthetic, very influenced by like late 70s like Dungeons and Dragons, which funnily enough we did a whole thing about on Beneath the Skin a while ago. Yeah, it's just that kind of mix of like high fantasy while also like Central European. I'm not a Nazi, I'm just gonna say that. I just like the art and the architecture and that sort of stuff.
It's an important disclaimer in this day and age.
Tom, I would argue that both of us being raised Catholic, I think we are actually naturally primed to like the FromSoft sort of formula because we can only derive pleasure through suffering, which is drilled into us from a very, very young age. And this is also a game that does that. But Blasphemous II, as opposed to the first one, seems like it's trying to be a lot more accessible to a wider audience because the first Blasphemous is brutal in a way that feels a little bit unfair a lot of the time, and the sequel really tries to be more Symphony of the Night than, say, what was it, like Ribald of Blood?
Rondo of Blood.
Rondo of Blood,
Ribald?
Yes. Ribald of Blood.
They're all different song types, AJ.
Yeah, I know. And it's a Ribald song.
I love to sing and dance to a Ribald.
It was a really, bold choice to make Alucard bald for the sequel, and the entire overarching story was his struggle with male pattern baldness,
Yeah, I mean, it's a struggle I know all too well. Well, speaking of Blasphemous 1, the Blasphemous franchise was developed by this company called The Game Kitchen, which, as you said, Tom, it was a collective of friends that was based in, I am so sorry, this is also going to the episode where everybody finds out that I'm very bad at speaking Spanish.
Seville. We call it Seville plenty
There's a barber
enough. We
from there.
anglicize names of things. It's fine.
Yeah.
They do it to us, too. It's
That's
okay.
true.
Yeah.
They, meaning the dastardly Spaniards.
Oh boy, we're off to the races already. But they were based in Seville, Spain, and they all were working different jobs and decided they just wanted to make games together.
Yeah, it was 5 people. It started with just 5
wow.
people,
Pretty
and it
small
literally, it was in someone's kitchen.
Yeah,
Hence the name.
hence the name. And they eventually got up to 7 people for their first initial crew, and they made a game called Rotoscope, which kind of looks like steampunk Tetris. It was very difficult from the 3 seconds that they show the footage of it in the documentary, but it kind of looks like it's Tetris, but you can rotate it and like blocks fall and explode. It looks like a lot of fun, and it's like sort of brimming with personality. And they submit it to a game development contest for Microsoft, and that gets them enough attention to start picking up game consultant work, where they start doing like background assets for like mobile games or for like edutainment games.
Yeah, they can help make games woke, like consultants like to do.
Yeah, and from the way the developers describe it, it was just a nightmare time in their lives because they were just working on things that none of them cared about. But the first thing
you can make the game woke if you put like a bocadillo in the background. the Nazis, they hate the small sandwich.
But yeah, the first game that they really put their heart and soul into was a game called The Last Door, which is a point-and-click adventure horror game. It was kickstarted in 2012, and it raised like £4,000, I think, at most.
They had a goal of £3,800, and they made a whole 4,000.
They did it.
But I mean, they made the game. So I mean, they had a really solid plan. They'd been working for long enough. They knew how to charge what they needed to charge. So has anyone played The Last Door?
No,
I haven't. No,
I've played a little bit of it a long time ago, and I didn't realize it was the same studio until we were working on this. I was like, oh my god,
is it any good?
Yeah.
Oh, it's really fun. It's a small scale point and click game. It's episodic,
right?
So they raised their £4,000. They released the first episode, and then they did 2 seasons of it. So I think it's 8 episodes total.
And I remember, too, the mid-2010s, episodic was the style at the time. You had, like, Telltale and stuff like that.
You had all the options for people who wanted episodic content. Just like, do you want to play an 8-bit game where you try and find the Moor hiding in your house? Or do you want to buy the furry detective game? It's like, games for everyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And now we have multiplayer live service games where there are still seasons and things like that, but I don't know. It just doesn't have the same spark. I'm not 12, and they're very popular among 12-year-olds, so I'm not going to judge the 12-year-olds of today.
And it's also like it's capitalism's dream too, right? That you just buy one game that you have to keep buying over and over and over and over again, as opposed to like a one-time purchase.
I think that's what Orwell said, is like the future is like imagine one game that you just keep purchasing forever.
And that game is Skyrim.
Yep.
George Orwell would have absolutely hated the Khajiit. That's all I'm going to say.
But I want to be fair to the Game Kitchen on this. Like, they are making real games that you buy in their entirety and play in their entirety, and they're able to build a name on that. That they're like making surprisingly comprehensive games given their relatively small resources, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And The Last Door, is one of those games. Everybody was very passionate about it, so they were able to do it. It also made absolutely no money because they didn't have a marketing team. They did not know how to sell the game. So they were on the verge of bankruptcy.
Wow.
They had to reduce their team of 7 to 3 people. And it was looking really dire, and so they needed to take a huge swing for the fences, and they decided to do just that by really celebrating their hometown of Seville and diving deep into what inspired them growing up. And so they made a game called Blasphemous.
Yeah, they kickstarted this. It had a $50,000 goal, so a little bit more than The Last Door was asking for. They hit
quite a bit more, yeah.
They hit that goal in 24 hours.
Yeah, they made this really incredible trailer that is pretty similar to the final game in terms of like locations and in terms of animations and things. They included a lot of the very visceral finishers that would like make people sit up because it was all pixel art, but it was like very evocative. The world felt macabre, and like people really bought into this thing. They ended up making $330,000 out of this thing, which means that they raised 666% of their original funding. And there's this wonderful video of all of them at an end of the campaign party where all of them are just like glued to the phone, like seeing if they're gonna get it, if they're gonna make it up to 666. And they do it, and they all start like chanting 666, and then one guy goes Half-Life 3 confirmed in the background. I'm just like, freaking nerds.
So they hit
nerds.
Every stretch goal with this,
including hiring a new level designer who didn't know if he would have a job until it hit that mark.
Wow.
And he posted a picture of himself holding a drink with the thing next to him saying, "Looks like I got hired."
So for a simple timeline here, Last Door is released in 2013. Its final episode comes out in 2016. The Kickstarter for Blasphemous is in 2017. And then the game itself releases in 2019.
Yeah, they sign on with Team 17, which is a West Yorkshire-based software publisher. They published Overcooked. They did the ukulele games and Worms. Of course, Josh. In all caps, don't forget Worms.
This is what I'm saying. Most importantly, then again, admittedly, I would not be as obsessed with Worms as I am were it not for the fact that, like, when I was a kid, I had a friend who was from England who, came over and introduced me to Worms. So I have deep-seated memories of sitting next to him, doing the hot seat multiplayer for Worms. We're going to have to do a Worms episode sometime.
Sure.
Oh, man, I remember playing Worms, like, on the sofa with my brother, and anytime I kill him, he'd just punch me in the head.
Yeah. The thing that I wanted to say about Team 17 that's kind of interesting here is that I think Team 17's backstory is actually very similar to Game Kitchen, where it just started out as a few guys who got together and made a game, and they were able to grow this now very large software publisher and developer off the back of that success. So I think you really couldn't ask for a better fit just in terms of overall culture here than Team 17.
Yeah, and they talk about that too in the documentary when they're talking. They got like offers from 20 different publishers.
Wow.
And they after that trailer dropped and they raised all that money. Obviously, publishers sort of chomping at the bit. But they went with Team 17 because of their similar backstories, but also, in the words of one of the designers, because they were in the same time zone. That was like one of the big things in their favor, because they were just like, it's so tedious that you would have to wait until 8 or 9 p.m. to be able to talk to anyone.
Right.
And you'd be stuck in sort of a holding pattern. So if you could send something and get an email back within like 15, 20 minutes, it's a completely different ballgame.
And that's kind of generally in line with the history of a lot of games production in Europe, obviously including the UK, is that like a lot of teams started out quite small, either in the late 80s, early 90s, and the ones in the 2000s came out of a lot of universities starting like games development. So if you have like University of Durham and a lot of universities in the Midlands in England started doing game development courses, and then suddenly you had like every year 5 or 6 people graduating, forming game studios, making small games, and every year you would have like one that came out maybe a couple of years before getting picked up by a big publisher or putting out a game that's kind of a surprise hit. So it's like it completely makes sense. And as well, like game development isn't really a popular industry in Spain in general as well. So that's why like this game is like such a success story, especially like something coming out of the south of Spain. Like if it was coming out of Madrid, it would be deeply fascist, and if it came out of Catalonia, it'd be like deeply pretentious. But you could tell my biases about Spain.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I found an AMA that the dev team did on Reddit back when Blasphemous 1 came out, and there were a bunch of commenters who came out and they're like, "It's just so cool to see something from Andalusia." Like it's cool. Like, and at that point they hadn't added the Spanish voice acting to the game yet, because that wasn't their Kickstarter goal. That was something they just got once they made a ton of money. And they were like, I really just want to hear something in our accent, man.
So Blasphemous is released, and it is pretty much universally praised across the board. There are people that sort of complain about its control scheme, which justified.
Well, and AJ, I remember when we were putting this episode together originally, and I had talked to Tom and was like, hey, Tom recommended we do Blasphemous. You then went and played it, and then you also played 2, and you were like, Josh, you are not going to be able to play that. Like we need to do 2, because that's the only one that you're going to be able to play.
Yeah, well, it's not that I didn't think you'd be able to play it. It's just that it's very difficult, and because I know this isn't either you or Brian specifically like type of game. Really, I found 2 so much more accessible and ultimately more fun, because it gives you more options of how to go through it, whereas Blasphemous is more my type of game, which is the original one, because you just kind of throw your head at the wall until you break the wall with your head. You can strategize. There are ways to do that in the original, but there's just so many more ways to do it in 2. And also, the spikes don't kill you in one hit. I'm sorry. You can fall on spikes and be fine. In the first one, you fall on them and you're instantly dead. And it's like, and the platforming is not good enough to sustain it. There is a bonus room in the first Blasphemous. That is,
oh my god.
Yeah, Tom, it is immediately the one I'm talking about. It is a platforming challenge that is so ridiculously difficult that I actually gave up, and that is rare for me.
That room and the Kirsay boss fight are like the 2 most frustrating experiences in the entirety of Blasphemous 1. Like the way I would describe it is like so deeply inflexible in every single way. Yes, you can customize your kind of build, but like everything outside of that is like, no, you are going to play this game the way we want you to, and if not, fuck you.
Yes, which I would imagine would be very frustrating. So I decided to go with the second one instead, because I also think the magic trick of it is that it retains pretty much everything that made the first game special, and then just makes it a little more lenient in its execution.
Yeah, I think the second one, like its lenience comes from the fact that like it's incorporating different elements together, so there's more variety in the challenges you have to face, rather than like just having the mea culpa and the slide, and it's just like, that's it. You have to work with these tools, and you just have to do it. Whereas like for the most part in Blasphemous 2, aside from like specific platforming sections, like there are a variety of solutions to a variety of problems, really.
But that, in spite of that inflexibility, Tom, or maybe because of it, like you fucking love that game, right? The original Blasphemous?
I think it's one of the best games of the 2010s, arguably. Like, I think, you know, when people talk about like some of the best games of the 2010s, they talk about stuff like, you know, Skyrim, which, incredible game, insanely janky. Like, you know, Bethesda doesn't release games that like work in any fashion aside from like 5% of the time. Whereas like Blasphemous is like almost completely jank free, but has that very stiff inflexibility and forces you to play the way that it wants you to. And I think is like, because I played it during COVID, like I played it during the first 6 months of COVID, and it's just like sitting in my underpants in my room playing it for hours on end. Like I'm talking like 10 hours in a row, just like not moving. Maybe it's because I was experiencing like isolation-based psychosis or something. I don't know. But it was like,
weren't we all, Tom?
Yeah, it was like I was playing Blasphemous and an original playthrough of unpatched Dark Souls 1.
Oh shit. Oh god, what's like the wildest thing about unpatched Dark Souls 1?
Collision mechanics do not exist. So like you can make a jump that like you think will work, and it's like you will clip through edges that you have solidly landed on. You will like run into an enemy and like kind of like a bumper car hit them and just glide away off a ledge.
Oh god. See, here's what I love about this is like I'm listening to this and I'm like, why would you ever want to do this? But then I'm looking at AJ and I'm seeing his eyes light up like a fucking Christmas tree.
Yeah, man. No,
and it's like,
shit.
Oh yeah, this is
Catholicism.
This is Catholicism. This is what it does to you.
This is the Pope at work.
The Calvinist mind cannot perceive.
The first game grabbed me so much because it was like such like deep world building, and like the characters felt like they had personality and agency, and it was like, you know, El Penitente is like you're kind of this both force for good but also force for chaos depending on what ending you get. And it's like similarly in Dark Souls is that like, you know, you are yet another kind of unkindled one, like going through the game. You are yet another penitent one who is just like experiencing this story, and the story is happening to you because you exist in the world rather than you are the protagonist. And I just I find that sort of world building in those sort of games so just like gripping. I'm not a massive Metroidvania person. Like I enjoy Castlevania games and like stuff that's kind of Souls related, like Salt and Sanctuary, Hollow Knight, stuff like that. But it was just, I don't know, it felt so different as well. It was pulling from a kind of visual language and a visual aesthetic and this kind of cultural inspirations that you don't really get in games quite a lot. You know, like you can play like a Yoko Taro game and it's like, yeah, it's hard and it's weird because Yoko Taro is weird, and like he's pulling from a set of reference that you kind of understand what he's pulling from, and obviously like if you're a weird philosophy person you get a lot what he's trying to say. But this like, and especially for someone who grew up in Ireland as like a Catholic, is like you can kind of get what they're saying even if you're like not paying attention to any of the story. But it's like, I don't know, it's just something that like really grips you immediately.
Yeah. So you were there for the initial run of this thing, and then as the DLCs came out and just more and more stuff was added, including that horrible platforming room, which I think the second DLC. But the one that's like the sort of the biggest expansion was the third one, which is Wounds of Eventide, which added the third ending, because Blasphemous 1 basically has two bad endings, but one's a little bit better than the other one, and then the third one is like the canonical like true ending, because they're like, oh shit, we have to set up a sequel.
It's a DLC ending because they're insane.
Well, and that's the thing, is that I'm pretty sure that within a month from now we're going to get another DLC ending for Blasphemous 2.
This will be a completely obsolete episode, so unsubscribe now. Take your money back.
No, It's the free one.
Yeah, come on.
That doesn't matter. That we need to learn a lesson. They need to punish us.
That's right. We owe them.
Don't take your money back. Demand payment from the three guys. They should pay you for wasting 2.5 hours of your time by listening to this. And we're going to talk about an ending that is not canonical anymore. God, if you applied this logic to when you fucking play Metal Gear, I think you should all just like jump out a window or something.
Oh, absolutely.
The industrious capitalist Protestant in me is like, no, we must be in control. Hey, everybody, it's Editor Josh here. Wouldn't you know it, the day after we recorded this episode, Team 17 announced that the Blasphemous II Mea Culpa DLC is going to be released on October 31. So just a little over a month from now, if you're listening to this at release. We might end up doing something about it, so stay tuned for that in the future. But yeah, my Protestantism and my work ethic even further foiled. Anyway, back to the show.
And so, basically, Blasphemous 2 comes out because Blasphemous 1 made a shit ton of money.
Yeah.
And, they wanted to sort of keep that ball going.
No Kickstarter. This is fully legitimate game development. They had investors.
They had, if I remember correctly, I watched all the dev diaries the other day.
Oh, cool.
They had 5 to 6 times the budget for Blasphemous 2 as they had for the first one.
Yeah.
They had like a team of maybe like 30 people.
Yes.
And they started developing Blasphemous 2 before Wounds of Eventide came out.
So they're able to, kind of more easily tailor that DLC to Blasphemous 2 because they already know to some degree where that product is heading.
Well, and what they decided to do with Blasphemous 2 is they just decided to throw out all of the code from the first game and build it from scratch from the ground up.
When you've got a team of 30 people, you can afford to do that, right? Simply rebuilding the whole thing from the ground up in any software project is an impossible task unless you have a clear plan, you have funding, and you have the team that can make it happen. It's very telling that they were even able to think about doing it.
Oh, if you want to talk about funding, they sold 5 million copies in the first 6 months of Blasphemous 1.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's the other thing too, is that like that was from September through just the beginning of March. So it wasn't even like they got the pandemic boost.
Wow.
Like this thing was just carried by its design. And I remember seeing a review from it somewhere and just being so enthralled by the design, but I had just done a Hollow Knight run and I'm like, I can't do another Metroidvania. That ate my life entirely.
I need 3 dimensions. They're closing in on me.
I want to see his Capote in 3D. I want to see the big cone in 3D.
Oh, what a nightmare! And I guess you can kind of do it in Elden Ring. They have the little pointy hat for the sorcerers.
Or you can just go to Santa Fe around Easter.
Do they have like a Spanish March of the Dead on Easter in Santa Fe?
AJ, the whole penitente thing is like, their big week is Holy Week. That's when they go and crucify their friends,
right?
Whip themselves with knives and shit. They have a. We don't need to get into the penitente stuff right now, but unless we want to,
why not?
I mean, I just picked up this off my shelf.
What do you got? I can't see the
Bible.
title. Oh, it's the Bible. It's the Bible. Okay, heard of it?
I was like, ooh, a book on penitentes. No, it's just the old.
I am
Bible.
the devil from the Bible.
Little known fact: Tom is the first Catholic to have ever read the Bible.
So penitentes are, and they use this term in the game too, confraternities, right? So they're not part of the ecclesiastical order. They're not part of the larger hierarchy. They're not priests. Right. They're often married. Have kids, have families. So they're kind of the original version of like Freemasons. Guilds would do, even to some degree. Some orders are more secretive than others, but like that's a big part of wearing the big pointy hood is like you're hiding your face. It's not entirely a Spanish thing. There are confraternities, or historically have been, in like France and Italy, but it's like mainly a Hispanic thing, something that started in Spain and went west.
Yeah, it's kind of like a secular version. Well, not necessarily a secular version, but a non-ecclesiastical version of like monastic living in terms of like fraternities of, Benedictines, Jesuits, etc., etc. Whereas like these are the lay people rather than the clergy.
Yeah,
right. They're just really into suffering.
Yeah, and what happens is like these lay orders become very powerful once Mexico becomes independent. Because then suddenly you have to make these larger administrative decisions of getting rid of the missionaries and the missionary orders and replacing them with priests.
Okay.
And that didn't happen everywhere, or it didn't happen quickly everywhere. So a lot of places you ended up having, it's almost like the Catholics invented evangelicalism without getting to Protestantism first in a lot of these places. So you'd have churches that were run by the confraternities. And so you'd have lay priests in certain places. And also people, especially up in like Santa Fe, got really sick of having to wait for some sort of approval from Rome to make a decision, to build a building, to do something that needed to be done. And so in like around like El Rancho de las Golondrinas, they become a lot more powerful. They start taking a lot of things into their own hands, and it's a very fundamentalist sort of thing. I went to one of the little like prayer houses at El Rancho de las Golondrinas, for instance, where I just saw the scariest Jesus I've ever seen in my entire life. These like carved wooden statues with huge hands and big bug eyes, and carved Grim Reapers everywhere.
Oh, cool.
Hell yeah.
It definitely speaks to a lot of the artwork in this game too.
Well, so then, Tom, do you have context for this on sort of the European side, specifically the Spanish side?
Yeah, so like essentially what happens around the 16th, 17th century is that as Protestantism is spreading throughout Europe, you have the emergence of stuff like Spanish Inquisition as like, as a consequence of the Spanish Inquisition, as the Caliphate of Cordoba is pushed back from southern Spain into Africa.
Yeah.
And what you have is, due to like the fracturing of state power within Europe and the rise of Protestantism, is like you have this diffusion of Catholicism a little bit away from Rome. So you have more kind of Catholic sects that are like forming outside of Rome doctrine and like applying more of a fundamentalist view of Catholicism, but is also like pairing it with like certain regional factors, so like influenced by folklore, local mythology. Like if you look at Catholicism in like places like the south of Spain or in North Africa, it's like very heavily influenced by kind of indigenous religion. I'm sure, Brian, you've experienced that with like the rip Jesus with the Grim Reapers in Santa Fe. It's like the iconography gets kind of rolled in because in a lot of these places, like that stuff didn't really go away.
Sure. Well, the same is true in Mexico, right? Like where you have like the Virgin of Guadalupe, just to use an example, where it's sort of like bringing in this old school mythology and then putting a Catholic veneer over it.
Yeah, and in Catholicism, I mean, part of the real strength of, even as it catches on throughout Western Europe, is its ability to syncretize, right? You can take an old folk myth and say, oh no, this was actually a saint, right? You kind of move the dates up a little bit, and it's like, so now instead of this being some sort of ancient pagan altar, it's a shrine. It's a good, godly, Jesus-loving, cleansed in the blood shrine.
Yeah, are you glad there aren't any snakes in Ireland? You're welcome.
I was talking the other day about how once when I was in a pub, absolutely off my face on drugs, I convinced an American guy that St. Patrick actually came from the Umayyad Caliphate.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
I was literally like pulling up maps on my phone and like lying to this guy for a full hour, like showing like trade routes from like the south of Spain to Ireland and everything, that St. Patrick was actually St. Patricio, and like this.
I will admit fully, I'm the kind of American who's stupid and gullible enough that I would abso-fucking-lutely go along with it 10,000%.
It is interesting too, because like I grew up in San Diego, so obviously there's a lot of missions in California. A lot of our Catholicism is very influenced by this sort of Spanish interpretation, and so I remember our Jesus as being pretty gnarly, and then going to like my friends' more evangelical churches and seeing just like a very nice white boy.
Well, that's if you see Jesus at all.
Yeah, or if it's
oftentimes,
just the cross. Yeah.
Well, you're rarely, if ever, going to see Jesus on the cross, right?
Right,
like
but in like the animated
Protestantism.
like Bibles or whatever, like in the illustrated Bibles, it was all just like it was very sanitized, and I'm like, I don't know, I was raised with this being a lot more heavy metal than I think,
and really to drive it home. You have not seen a Jesus like a penitent Jesus. They are just.
Oh yeah.
It's supposed to be comforting. His hands, he has like the Yowie fingers. He's got the big long, the gigantic hands because it's supposed to be like they're big hugging hands. The big eyes are supposed to be able to see everything. But I that was back in like 4th grade when we did our big field trip to Santa Fe, and it still haunts my nightmares to this day. The scariest fucking Jesus. And there is
not awaken anything in me.
A lot of these penitent groups in Spain, in Mexico, they do a lot of the difficult work of like dealing with the dead, like burial and cleaning and everything like that. That often falls to penitente confraternities. And it changes the theology, right? It shifts to being something that focuses on death even more. Right now, one of the orders in Santa Fe is working on building what might be the world's first and maybe only COVID memorial, for instance.
Wow.
Because there is an emphasis on looking straight at it, on looking straight at death and not running from it. And you see this in Blasphemous, where everything is like death and fluid, and it's all it's
a lot of goo.
It's like there's no in the Blasphemous games. There's like no idea of a soul. Everything is linked to the body and to the dirt and to the earth.
Yeah, and a big part of that, I suppose, before we start talking about like the actual story of the game, is that like when you look at Catholicism in that kind of high medieval period, it was like very heavily influenced by like the corporeality of sin and guilt, and like the origins of the penitent movement, I suppose, if you could call it, is that like there is no absolution of sin, it's only penance, and penance goes on indefinitely. And there is like essentially the idea, like the metal idea of like there is no absolution, there is no salvation, the only salvation is death. And obviously like this kind of iconography coming from Spain at the time was like 200 years beforehand, like when a lot of these visual references are being pulled from, like millions of people just died in the space of like 30 years because of the Black Death. And like the Catholic Church was heavily influenced by that in as the organizing structure of society in Europe at the time. How do you get people to come to terms with the fact that like millions of people, and there was only so many millions of people in Europe at the time, just don't exist anymore.
Yeah, it's also interesting that like sin in Catholicism for the most part is like experienced in the body, or like it's stored in the body, like, and
sort of like how pee is stored in the balls.
That's what I was gonna say. Is that like that
pee is a sin.
And when Christ was pierced by the spear of the lance of Longinus, out poured blood, water, and piss.
There you go.
Pee is stored in the Christ.
That piss.
That's why they call him Piss Christ.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Is that's why Jesus was extraordinary. Was his pee was stored everywhere, not just in the balls.
He spilled his pee for me and you.
He was actually hollow.
A hollow knight indeed.
I have to just get this out. I don't care if you cut it, Josh, but are you washed in the piss, in the soul cleansing piss of the Lamb?
Could you redo that as a Gregorian chant, Brian? Since this is a Catholicism episode.
What's Latin for piss?
I don't know. Just do it again, but just one note the whole time. That's what it has to be.
Pisse de Cristo.
There we go.
Amen.
So welcome to Cvstodia, motherfuckers. This is the haunted and cursed world that is Blasphemous.
Cvstodia.
It is a world ransacked by Goya and made in his image. It is ruled over by this, I wouldn't say malevolent, but pretty fucked up entity known as the Miracle.
I don't know if the Miracle is a vengeful god necessarily, but he certainly has his own whims.
It feels like Lovecraftian in that if the Miracle has motivations, it is unknowable to man because everything does seem to be arbitrarily cruel. Or arbitrarily very gracious, and there's no telling on what end of the coin you're going to hit.
Now, just to fill in a little bit of backstory here, in the first game, what do we learn about the Miracle?
The Miracle is this kind of amorphous god that doesn't necessarily have a good or bad side, like you said. The first Miracle, which you eventually see the site of the first Miracle, is the creation of the Twisted One, who essentially has a tree sprout around him and kind of turns him into a crucifix. And his final words are, "My great guilt." After that, the religion sprouts up that they worship this kind of idea of guilt, and that there are those who are afflicted with guilt and afflicted by the Miracle, and those who are blessed by the Miracle. And your whole journey is to end the Miracle, or essentially at the start it's to figure it out, and then at the end it is to end it.
Got it.
Right.
So you're trying to kill God, basically.
You're trying to kill the Pope and then God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the Pope for the main game, and then the 3 floating heads that are God in the DLC.
And essentially, yes, you kill God, you kill the 3 wills, and at the end of it, the Miracle has a heart, descended from the sky and has a child inside it. So it's like the Miracle essentially gains power from people's belief in it, and in order to get more powerful, it has tried to create Christ multiple times.
Yeah.
And it has failed.
And 2 really picks up then right where 1 left off, because this child now is basically in the process of being born.
It's like it immediately after, but also 1,000 years after.
Yes.
Because the 3 wills were keeping you alive, and so when you kill them, your sword disintegrates and you finally die. So you don't live to see this sort of golden age of unbelief that lasts for a millennium.
The new child is now sort of Damocles hanging over this whole situation, because basically what you learn as you start through the game is that there was a couple that wanted to give birth to a child, and so they prayed to the Miracle. And instead, they spawned this massive plague that fucked up everything.
Yeah. Well, and it's not their fault. It's like the Miracle's fault.
Right.
It doesn't quite know what it's doing. It's God of the universe in a way, in the same way that someone becomes a parent by accident. You know, it's like, it's very powerful, but it doesn't always know what it's doing, and sometimes it makes mistakes. And so this arrival of a sort of messianic figure is supposed to be like disfigured and dies and becomes a relic, but instead its disfigurement is contagious, and it starts to affect the entire world.
And so you once again here are El Penitente, the penitent one.
The same one from the first game. This is not like another person like in the confraternity.
Yeah.
And so what you need to do is go seek out this new child and destroy it. Now you're basically trying to kill Christ, right?
Yes.
And standing in your way is the Confraternity of Incorruptible Flesh. These guys are going to do their best to protect the new child. Eviterno is the sort of main guy heading that situation up. And that's basically the table setting for what's going to happen in this game. And unlike the first game, this is a much more refined, true Metroidvania, I would say.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, it leans,
and they went into it with that thought.
Yeah, it leans away from Dark Souls and more towards Symphony of the Night.
I mean, when you pull the map up on the thing, it looks just like the map from Symphony of the Night. And this massive interconnected world grows bigger and more interconnected as you unlock weapons and abilities, so that you're able to traverse the world in more and different ways.
Yeah. And I think now that we've done sort of the table setting for all this, I think the most impressive thing to me about this game is that it is so clearly Catholicism, but it never once references Jesus Christ or Mary or like it's not actually Catholicism, but it rhymes in this beautiful way.
And it's like an incredible conceit because it allows them to create this much more complex story and like do weird things with it. Like it's taking I suppose it's taking the vague recipe for Jesus and like, remixing a bit, like replacing some ingredients.
Well, and it's interesting too because the name of the game is Blasphemous. So you're sort of expecting that the narrative is going to be blasphemous in some way. And I guess it is in the sense that like,
well, you kill Jesus.
You're going out there, but it's not Jesus, right? Like it is a different thing. It's an entirely different kind of Jesus altogether.
It's an entirely different kind of
Jesus.
Thank you.
Jesus.
Sorry. I'll never get it right. I'll just never.
It's your own kind of personal Jesus.
But yeah, it is. It's really striking too because like the way they riff on it, they're clearly having a lot of fun with it, and the way that they incorporate not just Catholicism but also just like local urban legends is very fascinating in this game. And Tom, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more on that.
They took on some like local legends, a lot of local architecture, and kind of infused it into the game. Like one of them is the legend of Susana, who in 1480, in the final years of the Jewish community in Seville, it was kind of around the time of the birth of the Kingdom of Spain, and they tried to strengthen conformity to Catholicism, hence Spanish Inquisition, burning people, murdering people, etc., etc. And Susana was this young girl born to a merchant family. Her father was quite wealthy, and they were still practicing Judaism in private along with other Jews within Seville, and were essentially organizing an armed insurrection against the Inquisitors. And she was dating a Inquisitor at the time. This is very Shakespearean.
I was gonna say it's like reverse Merchant of Venice,
So she told her boyfriend, who immediately informed the authorities, and she was beheaded, and her head was hung outside her house for years. The floating hand merchant in the city of the blessed name, the skull that's above the doorway is the exact same placard skull that's still above the house where Susana was murdered.
Holy shit.
Yeah, and we've got a link in the show notes to this as well if you want to read more about that. But yeah, I was wondering about that when I saw the skull above the door. I was like, what the hell is that?
It's so many details like that.
You can tell that for the creators of this game, it's like they have such abiding love for their hometown, and they really want to get across the things that are unique about it. And we're going to talk more about that as we go through the game.
And if you get the digital art book for Blasphemous 1, they do have a lot of explanations about a lot of where their things came from, the local legends and stuff. Blasphemous 2, unfortunately, its art book is gorgeous, but it's just pictures, and they don't have that dramaturgy in there.
Maybe we'll get an enhanced edition once the DLC comes out. In sort of their like desire to like really delve into their hometown, they also have a Spanish voice cast for this.
Yeah,
and it is incredible.
It's incredible. It's so fucking good.
Yeah. If you play, the localized North American version, it's going to be defaulting to English. One of the first things you're going to want to do when you're playing this game is change the voice track over to Spanish.
Yeah. The English voice cast, I think, does a good job, but I think they were told that they were in the wrong game. A lot of the performances feel very cartoony.
Oh, I see my request was granted, and that blessed pilgrim delivered my offering to you. Cast open the cages whose keys were stolen.
In a way that the Spanish ones feel very lived in. Like you feel like you are in this very different world where everybody can just die because one person was born.
Veo que se cumplió mi petición, y aquel bienaventurado peregrino os entregó mi presente. Abrid las jaulas cuyas llaves fueron robadas.
The merchants in Blasphemous 2 speak with a Latin American Spanish accent because in the lore of the game, they are travelers from a faraway land.
Right.
Like, it's just... Right. The intentionality is incredible. The performances are so good. Like, everything about this game sounds is incredible apart from the glitch where the music doesn't play.
Yeah.
We will get there because that, oh boy, we'll get to Odon. But there is something that is so lovely about like hearing the voices, like, because you die to the bosses a lot in this game. That's one of the things that's sort of baked into the DNA. And I can't tell you how it was how like much more refreshing it was to hear the Spanish voice actor tell me that he was going to kill me for the 1,000th time.
It feels to me like one of those situations where unfortunately they didn't have somebody in charge of localization who really truly fundamentally understood both sides of the cultural and language divide.
The weird thing was it's like it was written in English, and the very first set of voice act, because that was a stretch goal on Kickstarter, was, and they say that right on the page, is like, once we hit this point, we will have full voice acting, English only, and then they added Spanish to the first game a couple years later. So like, I think they were doing most of their writing in English, even though it does feel localized, especially when they use some of the early modern English stuff, like thee and thou. The conjugations are just wrong.
Well, and again, it's like I don't speak great Spanish, but I speak, high school level Spanish.
I know what El Milagro is.
Yeah, El Milagro and El Penitente. And it's just like there are specific nuances of Spanish, particularly Spanish in the way that it gets conjugated, and you miss out on those intricacies if you're using the English voice actor.
You motherfuckers know nothing about ustedes.
I will never vosotros, my friends. Fuck you.
Vosotros, my friends, my ass. I won't vosotros, my friends.
So the game is split into two sort of very distinct parts. We have the first part, which is where you're tackling the sacred regrets. Basically, there is this upper elevated temple that is being held up by three giants, a la Majora's Mask, basically, but in reverse. And you have to get them to lower the city down so you can climb up and get closer to where you can kill Jesus. Yeah. And
you gotta climb up into a thing that falls down? What is this, Castlevania Symphony of the Night?
I mean, pretty much, right?
What's next, an upside down castle? Yes.
You get not one, but two of those. So right up top, you get to pick your weapon, which is really lovely. And you got three main weapon types.
Yeah, Kingdom Hearts, baby.
And they all have such cool fucking names. You've got Ruego al Alba, which is the fucking big-ass blade, You can throw it around. It's kind of like a big serrated machete.
Yeah, it's the closest you get to the first game's weapon.
Yeah.
Which is Mea Culpa.
Also, in a cool bit of design that you can't really see because of the pixel art, it's technically a chainsaw that has rosary beads as the teeth.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So that's the first one, and really this is if you want the balanced approach, right? It's pretty well balanced between offense and defense. You've got a good parry that you can use. When you power up the weapon, which we'll talk about later on, it gives you more abilities to sort of slash and dash more aggressively. The second weapon you can choose is Verdicto, which is a sort of swinging mace type thing.
It's an incense.
It's a sensor.
It's an incense sensor.
That's right. Yeah.
It's so cool.
Functionally, it works as a mace, but yes.
It's a big bludgeoning weapon. It's like a flail. You can kind of swing it around. You can set it on fire because it's a sensor. This is the easy mode weapon, and I was very grateful to have this because it hits very hard. And it usually hits like twice in a single hit, or sometimes even 3 times if you're kind of getting it in the air. It's slow, but it allows you quite a bit of distance as well. Like they really have just like you have your balanced weapons, and then you have this thing that's like, do this if you're Brian.
Yeah. This is
well, you can't block with it, and that's sort of the big disadvantage to it.
Once you get really to the end, it's like, hey, did you just use the easy mode weapon the whole time? Fuck you, you're not beating this game, Brian.
And again, just to like make a Castlevania comparison here, this is Richter's whip.
Yeah, this is your whip
from Castlevania, more or less. Except that it hits way, way harder.
The game puts a little like ghost for you to test your hits on to see just and when you're using the other two weapons, it takes a lot of hits to take down. And then it's like, use the mace if you're stupid, use the mace if you need to be easy. And so I sure did.
And then the third weapon here is Sarmiento y Centella. This is a sword and dagger, 2 blades that you can use. This is if you want to be a fast boy and you want to chop the fuck away at guys and you want to be dashing back and forth and parrying quickly. For me, this was the most fun to use, although admittedly I am not at the skill level necessary to really fucking utilize it correctly.
Yeah, these felt like toothpicks to me.
They were so weak.
My first run, I didn't use them almost at all. And then when I did my second run, I was just like, okay, I'm actually going to try and get good with these things. And man, let me tell you, they are very powerful once you figure out how to use them. But it requires you to be very good at not getting hit. Because their whole power up and scaling system depends on a system that goes away if you get smacked.
Yeah, it's basically a combo system.
Right. And this is actually, they're based on a Spanish form of fencing from the 16th century. And like that's the whole idea that like you lose the power up if you get hit, similar like you lose a point in fencing.
Oh, interesting. Oh,
and
that rules.
This gets very OP very fast in a fun way.
Yeah.
What the game doesn't tell you is each of these weapons is also a tool that works in specific contexts that will change the way that you play the beginning of the game.
It's Dark Souls 2.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The best Dark Souls game, I'm just gonna say.
Wow. Okay. I
Shots fired.
I like Dark Souls 2. Let me be very clear. I like Dark Souls 2.
You're a 3 boy, right, AJ?
I am unfortunately a 3 boy, which makes me vilified by both the Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2 lovers because they're just like, you are wrong. And I'm like, that's fine.
I will say Dark Souls 3 is personally my favorite, but Dark Souls 2 is the best one.
Yes! Oh, Tom, finally someone agrees with me! Oh.
So basically, you fight, first thing, almost right away, what is basically a tutorial boss. That's
the big wheelman.
Yeah, this guy chucks a wheel at you, and you pretty quickly figure out how to jump around, how to parry, things like that, just sort of learning the basic movement mechanics. This is also where you will likely die for the first time, and this is going to happen to you often in this game. This is a game that, again, it's got Souls-like DNA, and dying is a very big, very important part of the game. So
hope you like going to confession, where we're doing we're doing Catholic catechism at a microcosm right now. Everyone gets to be Catholic.
We sure are.
And just like Catholicism, if you pay them enough money, you can eventually just do it yourself.
So as you progress through the game, you're going to find these little things. They're called pre-dues, right? That's what this is.
Redo.
And these are save points. Essentially. Very
bonfires,
or the coffins in Castlevania Symphony of the Night, right?
We will talk about an extremely annoying point about the Pré-Dues that I only realized halfway through my first playthrough.
Oh, we could talk about that now. What happened?
I didn't realize that if you find the Kobiyaha, or I can't remember exactly how you say them, the sisters, if you find 6 of them, you can turn it into a teleport point.
I realized really early on that I needed to find those sisters because the rewards they gave you were so astronomically important to my enjoyment of the game.
But you still can't really find them until pretty late, like to get to that point of 6.
And they do have teleporters that are not in the form of pre-dues that are these giant hands that you can walk through that get you to a general sort of area.
Yeah, these are, again, very similar to the teleporters from Symphony of the Night.
The pre-dues also do the same thing that bonfires in Dark Souls do in terms of replenishing your health potions, right? Something that From figured out with Dark Souls was like, oh yeah, what if we didn't make players buy health potions, but just make it this really integrated mechanic? You have a set amount, you can upgrade it, maybe get a few more refills and stuff like that, and then it just is going to replenish once you get to the save point.
And to the point of replenishment here, right? Your health is indicated with a big red bar. If you've played video games before, you know what this thing is.
It's bile.
But
there's also a secondary bar there's a blue bar directly underneath the red bar. And this blue bar represents something that's called fervor in this game. It's your secondary currency. These are the hearts from Castlevania. They give you the ability to do whatever your secondary attack or ability is. And we'll talk about these.
It's your magic, but they're prayers.
The way that this game works is that when you die, you accumulate something called guilt. And the more guilt you have, the less fervor you have available, meaning the less of your secondary attack or power you can use. Additionally, the more guilt you have, the harder the game gets, but you get better rewards in return for playing at that difficulty level.
You can, as we mentioned before, you can absolve your guilt by going to a strange little confessor man who has this very. I love this room so much.
Cool.
It's a church, and it has like a long red carpet that leads up to it.
Yeah, runner. It's like the world's longest runner.
But it's attached to the guy in the confessor booth that you don't ever see. Yeah. And over the course of it, like more and more flowers get put on there as you get more and more confessions, and then eventually he'll just die. But you can then use the pre-dues to automatically alleviate your guilt.
He gets replaced with the evil confessor as well.
Oh, I don't know if I interacted with the evil confessor.
Oh, you didn't?
I don't think so.
Yeah, this didn't happen to me in my playthrough either.
Yeah, he dies, you go back in, and then he's replaced with like essentially a confessor who's in all black and essentially just makes fun of you for absolving your guilt.
That's awesome. Oh, that's incredible. Wow.
Yeah, the other aspect to guilt is that it does the Dark Souls thing. If you die, you can go and pick it up.
Shovel Knight also similar mechanic in Shovel Knight if you played that.
But you don't lose your currency in the same way.
Yeah,
True.
so you don't lose your experience point, currency, souls thing. That stays in your pocket.
Right.
All you have to do is pick that thing up and you'll get your guilt reduced, but it doesn't reduce it all the way.
Right.
You will always retain just a
Your
tiny
guilt
bit of guilt
doesn't
for
get
every death.
absolved.
Until you go see the guy. And then it does.
In case you didn't know, this game was Catholic. You are never clean.
No.
Not until you kill Jesus yourself.
And I guess I wanted to take a moment here, AJ and Tom, to sort of ask you about this specific mechanic, because I think it's a really cool example of using a mechanic to tell a story and expand upon the themes in the game. How did this hit you?
I thought it was like really good. I thought it was a smart way to like incorporate that like Dark Souls 2 like reducing, and I think it was a smart idea to have them reduce your fervor because it works like both mechanically as a game, because you can play the game and not use the prayers or chants at all. You can just use melee and you could be totally fine. But I think it thematically works as well because like it's called fervor, religious fervor that's used for prayers, that like the accumulation of guilt like reduces your capacity for devotion to the miracle. And I think it was a really cool idea.
Right.
And it also makes your life a lot harder.
Yeah.
You can still live without it, but you're going to have a really, really tough time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's nice that it affects fervor and not health, which is sort of my bigger problem with a lot of the stuff. And I think Demon Souls does that too.
Yeah.
Where it just feels less fair. It's like you can take away my toys, but not my basic ability to survive, which is also kind of what Catholicism does with its weaponization of guilt.
Yeah, it takes away your ability to like function as like a normal person in social situations and internally in your own head, like your ability to reconcile your own being and existence and relationships with others. Catholicism, as you accumulate guilt, that chips away at that as well.
And the guilt is important in the game, like in the story of this game, because those statues that are holding up the big city, the Anne Orlando of Blasphemous II.
Yeah.
Those statues are held up by guilt that was placed in the bosses that you have to fight by the miracle. The guilt itself is a powerful and necessary force. You cannot be blameless. It's actually in some way a weakness to be blameless.
Well, this is something that I maybe wanted to talk about a bit too, because, Brian, we have talked in the past about the difference between Protestant and Catholic guilt. Right. The idea of guilt as an honest-to-goodness metaphysical force is, for me personally, very strange. I don't understand that intuitively, because for me, guilt is more of a function of the emotional self. And it's like I have committed some sort of a personal betrayal between me and, you know, the Jesus who I have a personal relationship with. That betrayal of those principles is the thing that gives me a sense of guilt. But the only way that guilt can be absolved is by being like, hey, Jesus, I'm sorry. And once you're done with it, you're done with it. It's going to come back the next time that you make a mistake, of course, but it doesn't sit with you in the same way.
Yeah, I think just to jump in, like, you know, Catholic guilt is kind of like having a Spotify subscription. Is like once you stop paying, you lose access to its absolution. So it's like, you know, unless you pay your subscription, in terms of like going to mass, you can't get communion, which strengthens your bond with God. Unless you've gone to confession, it's like, you know, if you don't pay the toll, you can't get into God's hole.
Well, there's a mediator too, right? The idea that like in Protestantism with
your
with
mediator
guilt,
is Jesus Christ.
Well, no, your mediator is a priest.
No, come
on. What's
in
Jesus for?
No, see,
why even have a
Jesus
Jesus?
Is so busy, you guys. He's being so hot up there on that crucifix.
He's so busy not being a mediator for anybody.
Jesus is my friend. I have a close personal relationship with him.
And
he
that's
is
the thing.
Just all right with me.
No, and that's the thing about Catholicism is that Jesus is not your friend.
Right.
Jesus does not care about you.
Right.
Jesus is a miracle in a certain way, right?
Yeah.
He exists as this in the firmament of the stars.
He's
loves
got those
you.
big hugging hands.
Like, don't get me wrong, he loves you, but he also sees the time knife, so he doesn't have time for you necessarily. Where that's what a priest is for. You need someone to advocate on your behalf. You need somebody with Riz to go and talk to him for you.
Yeah, I think with
baby
there's sort of a
rizzed up baby Jesus.
Baby Jesus
raised him up.
Baby Gronk was at the nativity, you know. That's what the three wise men were doing. They were rizzing up baby Jesus with myrrh, frankincense. When you think about it, the three wise men were really kind of love bombing baby Jesus, you know, like
very problematic.
I would say
the age gap there was huge.
The three wise men were actually we three Riz kings.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wait, get this. Gold, frankincense, and Rizmur.
Oh my God.
Ryan. Double chunk chocolate myrrh.
There it is.
The three wise men are just doing like TikTok channels like, come with me to rizz up baby Jesus, and just Riz cam. They have like a GoPro strapped to their head.
Hey guys, it's me in Bethlehem.
Thank you to Mohammed bin Salman for sponsoring this video.
Go play Monopoly Go. But like, guilt in the Protestant sense is like, you don't have to keep doing the work to absolve it over and over and over again. But then that's kind of a helpless thing.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like you got saved, bro. Deal with it. Mm-hmm. Like, I guess, you know, just work it out in your mind. You know, it's a lot more, even when it's not necessarily academic, right? Josh, the Calvinist way of doing things is very academic, very, very book learning based. And the Southern Baptist way is not that. But it's still in the mind. It's still intellectual. And it's still something that you have to like work through in your mind and your emotions. But there's no act of penance. There's no saying 50 Hail Marys. There's no rubbing it out on a rosary or whatever you do.
Mostly that.
Oh, okay.
In a perfect world, in a perfect system, the idea of Catholic confession makes a lot of sense. It is always better to work it out with another person, a trusted, close compatriot, than to keep it inside yourself and to spiral out like that, right? And then to actively take steps to then alleviate that guilt in your mind. Like all of that in a perfect closed system, I look at that like that makes total sense. The problem is when your trusted confessor is a priest who can possibly use that information to hold power over you, or who actually doesn't know who you are and uses their position to abuse you, right? So, and I think what this game sort of encapsulates is that ability of like, yeah, you can alleviate your guilt in this perfect closed system, because if the priest tries to come for you, you could bash him over the head with a giant mallet.
Yeah, you know, like it was weird. You know, I went to confession and the priest said I had to buy him a PS5.
And you know what I did? I bought him 5 PS5s.
I would really like that if like the church's main scandal was just that the priests are all gamers and they just keep making their congregants buy stuff for them.
I just got a text from my priest asking me to send him $500 worth of Steam gift cards. Do you think this is legit?
Just like playing Fortnite duos with Jesus. And it was like, I'm clearing left, I'm building. But like, this is the thing with, you know, Protestantism is interesting in the sense that like it got rid of the middlemen or the importance of the clergy, and that like you said, AJ, the personal relationship with God is different in the sense that like in Protestantism it's like specifically the importance of the relationship with Christ rather than with God, whereas in Catholicism Christ is the conduit through which faith in God is channeled, and then through priests and to the congregation. So it's more so like this kind of mediated communal relationship with God, whereas like Protestantism is like, yeah, there was this guy called Jesus. He was just like you. He loves you. He wants to be your friend. He wants to go for ice cream. Are you free on Thursday?
Right. Well, we talk about this a lot on the show, how like Catholicism is it's a bureaucracy. You have the appropriate channels.
They love red tape.
You sign off on the correct forms. It goes up through the chain, and you know you're good.
Yeah, the Catholicism is like a gym membership, because it's really hard to cancel a gym membership, and it's really hard to get excommunicated from the church.
Look, I've been trying, man, and they just won't let me go.
AJ's been aborting so many fetuses.
But this is why, you know, like I'm fascinated by Mormonism, because it's like, yeah, you can fuck each other's wives, but you can't drink coffee. It's like,
it really that just seems like Mad Libs. That they spun a wheel and it was like, I guess coffee is bad. I don't know. It's like a lot of like religious traditions seem to derive from like actual just health concerns of the time, like the whole shellfish thing, you know, in
circumcision.
Just it was, you know,
pork.
What's the Robin Williams joke? You don't want to get sand up there. You know, like all that makes sense to me. But then we start getting into sort of, you know, more recent religions, and it's like, well, you can't have caffeinated beverages. Yeah. And I'm just like, I guess that is a health concern, but
it's going to reflect the neuroses of the people in charge.
Yeah.
That's what it is, right?
And reflect the social neuroses of the time as well. Like it's part of why like the big, you know, obviously the original schism between like Catholicism and Protestantism is like indulgences, but also when you look at like Protestant doctrine around like idolatry and like idols within churches, like that was a direct reaction to the opulence of European churches. It's like, well, why are we spending all this money on gold filigree when people are starving? It's not like the Protestants fed many more people, but you know, it's the principle of the thing.
Yeah, right. They were posting about it. Martin Luther very famously posted about it.
And then you have just like the power user like of Christian posters is just like the Dutch Protestants. It's like, oh yeah. I'm gonna write a 1700 page about bread.
Instead of NFT profile pictures, they all have tulip profile pictures.
But those tulips, NFTs.
That's right. Oh my God, it's all connected.
When the tulips crashed, they were just as worthless as NFTs. So, you know, time is a flat circle.
Oh, that's right.
But I think also there's this aspect of when you take away the intercession of priests, of saints, of any of that, you also have this, I think unintended side effect of masculinizing the religion. Protestant Christianity ends up being entirely about the men. Even if it's like progressive Protestantism and you have women who are pastors and women have higher roles in the church and everything, the spiritual element, the highest points on the map are all male, whereas in Catholicism and in Orthodoxy, they have found a way to venerate femininity, venerate motherhood, venerate even just like, and Blasphemous takes this further because it's so, it has all of these operatic images of fluid, of blood, of breast milk. And that motherhood is so important spiritually to the religion.
Yeah, I unfortunately have to push back on that because not modern European Catholicism. We were sending unwed mothers to reform homes run by nuns until the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, it's not good for women, and it's still entirely patriarchal, but there is...
Brian thinks that the Catholic Church is the best example of gender norms in the world, actually.
Yeah.
They got it all figured out.
It's not feminist. It's not the divine feminine. This does not mean the Catholic Church is cool.
No.
Yeah, like the Catholic Church is like... I would argue the Catholic Church is the most evil thing to ever happen to Ireland. Like, pretty much everything that's bad about the country can be traced back to the fact our constitution was written with the Archbishop of Dublin in 1932. Eamon de Valera, once again, America's the cause of all our problems as well.
USA.
It's also, I saw Neil Jordan give a talk back when I studied abroad in Dublin, and he was just like all the pre-sex scandals culturally had the same effect on Ireland as 9/11 had on America, just in terms of like a complete dismantling sort of that like iron grip control. And now we see Ireland coming to the forefront of like progressive issues pretty much across the board in a way that is encouraging, I would say, after having
first
been under the
country
yoke
to enshrine abortion rights via general vote. Fuck yeah.
Yeah, fuck yeah.
Wow, a general vote for policy. That sounds so nice.
Yeah, God, what we wouldn't fucking give. But speaking of the Catholic Church's chokehold on the imaginations of a people, Blasphemous II also has a light of like an entire mechanic built around icons, which I think is just so cool.
It is cool. So basically, when you get to the main hub town, you just go through a few little like pathways, just kind of get you into the game, get you into the movement. You arrive at the City of the Blessed Name. And here in the city, one of the first people who you meet is a stone carver, and he's in the process of carving out this big icon of sort of the town's patron saint. And he also has the ability to craft these little wooden icons that give you bonuses, give you passive bonuses, and you get a bunch of these, and eventually you mount them on your back, and the more of these icons you carry around, the more passive buffs that you get. So let's talk a bit about this system.
Yeah, this guy's name is Montañez. And he's basically a Goya parallel, right? Except instead of going deaf, he's going blind, but he's still in a dark room working on his little fucked up things.
Yeah, it's just like being a podcaster,
Yeah.
You sit in a dark room and work on things that no one will care about until you die.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So, what this does is it gives you more incentive to find all the places on the map. Like, every place that you're like, oh, I can't reach that yet. Put a little marker down on the map, go back around. This game has a lot of, I call them chores, where it's like you've found your new upgrade, do your little circle around the map again, find the next thing. And there are also these sort of secret interactions that the idols have with each other. So you put them into your idol backpack in pairs. Notice I keep saying idol because I grew up Protestant. You put them
These are graven images.
You're collecting small Korean men that you put on your back. You're collecting Jungkook. You're collecting other members of BTS. They interact with each other.
Yeah, and if you put two BTS members together, it'll give you a certain type of bonus. But if you put two Super M members together, it's a different kind of bonus.
That's right.
But you can also find like little secret ones. Like maybe you get someone from Girls' Generation and someone from BTS in the same one. And then that's like a totally different one.
I fucking hope you do.
Like obviously if you pair RM and Jimin, you get a very obvious, passive buff. But like, sometimes you get Girls' Generation and BTS or like, you get more interesting ones. Yeah.
And
Psy pairs with everybody.
If you get the Psy stuff like wood carving, you get to do 9/11 in game. It's really weird. Like
you have like a bit where one of the endings is unlocked by utilizing this idol system, by putting like the 4 apostles, I guess, the 4 most important
Wait, no, I wrote
idols.
I wrote it down.
Cool.
What they're called. The 4 envoys.
The 4 envoys. If you put them in specific slots, they will burst into flames, and you will use their incense in order to unlock the big bad ending.
Oh, cool.
It's a very cool hidden mechanic that most people, if you are like me, will just Google.
The other big thing that sort of isn't unlockable as you go through is the prayer system. We talked about that a little bit ago. This is the thing that you use fervor for, the blue
spells.
bar. And like Castlevania, the attacks consume points. Unlike Castlevania, you recharge your blue bar through your standard attack by just whacking guys.
Yes.
There are destroyable candelabras in this game, which is delightful. They don't do anything. It's just there to be a Castlevania reference. I think that's fun.
Yeah, they straight up drop nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah. And there's also one of my favorite areas of the game, Mother of Mothers, which is a carryover from the original games into this one, but it's 1,000 years later, so everything is fucking ruined.
Yeah, it's under the rest of the map. Yeah,
you can destroy the bells, like the big old bellmen that would give you trouble. That give you trouble in this game and in the original game, and also drop nothing. It's just like, well, you hit it. Do you feel any better? And your El Penitente is like, no,
That's
I
very
will never
Catholic.
feel better.
Very, very Catholic.
Very Catholic.
Pero no sé, I do not feel any better. I destroyed this bell. I get nothing. What the fuck? ¿Qué coño?
So then the other set of passive benefits that you get in this game come from your rosary. And you can place different beads and then upgrade it to get more beads.
It's your armor, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's mostly like defensive kind of stuff. Big defensive bonuses towards the end.
Some boost your currency.
I think that what they really did a good job of in this game is optimizing each of these systems so that it's clear what the purpose of each of them is.
Yes.
There is a very clear upgrade tree for the 3 primary weapons. And to upgrade those weapons, you use your, Marks of Martyrdom, which is just a currency that you sort of collect along the way.
Yeah.
The prayers are your spells, the rosary is your defense, and the idols on your back are the passive buffs. It really all makes sense. It's all very clear, and it all lends to the world building. So now that we've had a chance to talk about all of the mechanics of the game, we're really going to dive deep into the plot, as well, of course, as the bosses, which really are the meat and potatoes of this game. So when we get back from our break, we'll talk more about that. And I expect that AJ and Tom are going to get even more fucking Catholic with it. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back with you.
And also with you. Hello, worst of all possible worlds listeners. It's me, the Pope. Wahoo! Once again bestowing your listening ears with my deeply authentic accent and my signature air of frocciacine. What? I can't say a frocciacine no more? But it's my favorite thing to say after Mamma Mia. And let's just move him to a new diocese. Ugh. Fine. Fellow sinners, it's no secret that the Catholic Church has been having some hard times lately. Parishioners are leaving in droves. Nobody wants to buy a Neapolitan ice cream, our main source of income, no more, after they found out it was made of a Pope milk lovingly coaxed out of my many nipples on my thorax. And most worryingly, we can't seem to connect with the youth no more. Whatever did we do to alienate an entire generation of young people? All right. So in that spirit, the Holy Spirit, wahoo, the Vatican is proud to announce the launching of Vatican III. The Realms, a game developer focused exclusively on making new and exciting video game experiences for God's chosen bureaucrats. Games like Paper Mario, hey, that's me. Halo, no, not that one. And Gregorian Chant Hero, where you can sing along to all of your favorite contemporary Catholic rock songs. Songs like On Questioning the Bureaucratic Structure of the Intercession of Saints in regards to your personal relationship with the Almighty. Hey,
If you start thinking that it's a bit weird that every time you break God's law, you have to ask some guys on cards to talk to God on your behalf when they are probably at the water park. Yes, heaven is filled with water parks. There's never a line and the water is clean, or the water is piss if that's your thing. We're not here to judge, except we totally are. And all the while you still think it's cool to stop a saint while he's on a slide, to ask him to put in a good word for you, because you said that your barista's a bitch, when it was in fact you that was being the bitch. And the saint will be forced to get off the slide, because he is the patron saint of dogs. And you were like, man, that's close enough. And he'll be like, actually they're different things. One is a dog and one is you. And you'll go, that's not very nice. And he'll say, I was crucified upside down. And you'll be like, whoa. And he'll be like, yeah. And you'll be like, did it hurt? And he'll say, what? Of course it hurt. I was crucified. I'm starting to think that barista was right. And maybe you are the dumbest person alive. And you'll say, at least I wasn't crucified upside down. And he'll say, I can't believe I got off the slide for this. And you'll say, what slide? And he'll explain that heaven is filled with water parks. Like Colorado, you will ask. Like Colorado, he will confirm, and you'll sit in a silence for a time until you say, sometimes I go to water parks just to pee. And he'll say, you should probably pray to someone else. And if after the saint hangs up on you, you start to think maybe this system is dumb, don't.
Mamma mia, that's some spicy frocchegine. So boot up your consoles and play the only games you don't have to give up for Lent. Vatican 3D Realms. Live, die, repent.
So yeah, we're back, and it's time to talk a bit about the bosses.
Yeah.
Because
the boss's baby.
The boss's baby. The boss's not baby. The boss's adult. The boss's spiritual.
The boss's daddy.
Yeah. In first game, big boss baby.
That's true.
No boss baby in this one.
There's technically a boss baby at the end. He's
that
just
is true.
He's an adult baby.
Yeah,
adult baby.
As we were noting in the first part, there are these three big guys holding the sacred city up above the town. And it's our job to bring that big floating city down to earth.
We must lower the city.
And so what you do is you go through these sort of initial accessible dungeons. And the one that you're going to go to first is pretty much based on which one is accessible to you based on the weapon that you have. Because as we mentioned earlier, each of the three primary weapons has a secondary thing that it's able to do. With the big mace, you're able to whack these bells, and these bells show invisible platforms.
Yeah, they turn liquid metal solid like bells do.
Yeah, and also if you hit the bell 12 times, you get the achievement, Happy New Year.
That's funny. If you have the two blades, there's these mirrors that you can whack, and they teleport you. And then the big blade, it has the ability to cut down these barriers that stand in your way.
Yeah,
they're made of people.
Like human walls.
You slice them open, but only if you jump from a high enough distance.
So remember, if you want to stab someone, make sure you jump from a high enough height to efficiently stab them to death.
Exactly.
And just yell Assassin's Creed on your way down.
Legally, since I live in the UK, I probably shouldn't be saying that.
There's a bit where you can go to any single dungeon you want of the three initial ones because the two weapons that you didn't pick are there, and you are able to get them and then work through the dungeon. Like it's more like a Zelda dungeon, right? There's a whole bunch of inaccessible shit, but then you get the thing that makes it more accessible. But there is one dungeon that will be more catered to you based on what weapon you chose, and it really changes the flow and feel of the game. And I know this because I've now played through it twice, and it was a completely different feeling the first two between the first two playthroughs.
Well, let's talk about these first three bosses, shall we?
Sure.
So curious to hear from everybody. What was your favorite of the first three?
Oh, for me, it's definitely great Preceptor Radames because he goes... Radames. He goes full Goya and devours the priest on his back. He's a big skellyman who shoots glass at you.
Oh, so cool.
It's in this sort of like immense desert area. It's these entombed catacombs or whatever. And you have to jump over him. And I pretty much love all the bosses where there is something in the environment that you have to utilize against them in like a traversal way. There's the one where you're going up the elevator shaft a bit later in the game, what I also really liked because it utilizes platforming in a very fun way.
A cool bit of lore about Radames is like in the background, there's just like the giant hill of ash with bodies, and the lore behind that was that he was the confessor for all the priests, so they would all come to him, and he is dead but alive, and he has been sustained by all of the guilt that he has absorbed from other priests.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is where you meet Yerma, who is the NPC that I felt most attached to besides the sculptor, because Yerma follows you throughout the whole game, and you can follow her quest line up until the very end. And like most, sort of FromSoft NPCs in that sort of same vein, completing any character's quest line means death or destruction, or like that the world becomes worse for them in some
or
way.
a strange decision you make over here will just make her dead. And I felt kind of a clash between most of the game and the bosses, because the bosses are pretty fucking hard.
Yeah.
And the rest of the game is not actually that hard. Like, it's one that you have to work through. And I found out later that they had patched the game a couple months after releasing it and made the bosses harder.
Well, made one very specific boss harder.
And instead of kind of having 2 phases, they sort of have like 5, where it's like they get faster at halfway, and then they get faster at a quarter, and then they get faster as like a last burst, or like throw a couple more attacks in there. And for me, I didn't appreciate the stress. Because I'm a little baby.
That's why I can tell you're not Catholic, because you didn't enjoy the pain.
Well, that's the thing, right?
I like real pain, not video game pain.
I was on the same page as you, Brian, where, like, and I'm on the record about this. Souls-like games are, broadly speaking, not for me. And
it's like AJ and City Builders.
Yes. Sure. Yes. And I similarly sort of ran up against my limitations in this game as a player. What I will say, though, is that the actual design of these characters was so fucking cool that I was able to forgive a lot of my own personal I guess, misgivings about the way that the game felt. I really loved Afialor, who is this, like, he's a knife sharpener, and he's kind of like a scarecrow guy.
Yeah, he's got like a katana.
And what I learned about this is that it's another very specific reference, where in Seville, there's these guys who go around on little bikes, like little motorbikes, and they are the mobile knife sharpeners of Seville. They've got these little like pan flute things that they'll blow into to let you know that they're around. There's a fantastic little documentary that I'm going to link in the notes as well. It's just like a 5-minute BBC thing following around one of these guys. And they're kind of a dying breed. But for the guys who are still around, they're able to get enough business from, the kitchens and the
barber of Seville, probably.
I mean, yes, actually.
The demon barber of Seville.
Barbers use them to sharpen their blades, stuff like that. And they go around.
They only have the one. I saw a documentary about it on stage once.
He's cycling around. He's like, "Oh, lo siento, señor. I cannot sharpen samurai sword. It's only kitchen knives, scissors. I will not sharpen your zombie knife."
Well, I love this guy because his phases are he just gets a worse knife. Worse for you. It's better for him. Worse for you.
Because the blade is growing sharper. And when he's about to do his big slice, you hear the little flute thing that the knife sharpeners do in the street to let you know that they're around. I thought that was delightful.
That is really cool.
The cool little phase transition of when he jumps into the background and is like throwing swords in the air that like then come down the screen at you. And when he jumps back to the foreground, he gets like a little 3-second thing where he's sharpening his knife on the wheel and then goes back to fight you.
Yeah. You can hear him go like just to like get ready for it. Like he's a little dweeby guy actually. I love that boss
He's
battle.
different, I think, in his fashion than all the other bosses in the game. There's something about his look and his stance and everything that's unusual.
There's an achievement tied to getting to him within 30 minutes. Because I think you have to have all 3 weapons unlocked in order to get to him.
Oh, that's true. He's actually the 4th boss now that I think about it.
Yeah. And he's the one that points you in the direction of you've brought the big thing down, right? You've brought the elevated temples down to size by defeating these 3 bosses. One of the bosses is just Ormstein and Schmo. And you climb to the top of this thing after the knife sharpening guy is like, hey, you got to go up there and free these 5 doves now. Because it turns out that the 3 people that you needed to kill, it's actually 8 people. There are 8 big major bosses. And then you climb up to the elevated temples, and this is like the first huge difficulty spike in the game of just regular enemies. And I know what the design purpose is. It's that you get up there, you immediately have your ass kicked, and you're like, okay, I'm going to explore more of the map, go back to where you were. But the effect of it for me is I got very frustrated, beat my head against the wall until I got through to the other side. I did not go right back and re-explore.
I will say my favorite of the early bosses has to be Ospina. I am an Ospina defender.
Okay.
The fencing, the teleport attacks, it's so cool. Funny, if you watch the dev diary, the designers were super inspired by Street Fighter. Like the kind of...
That's what it
feels like a fighting game.
Yeah.
Orspeed is cool too because that's the one where if you're using the 2 blades, it's the boss that you're the most likely to go up against.
Yeah.
And so it is all about learning the mechanics of the dodges, the parrying, and everything else. And if you learn it well, you get a very big advantage very quickly.
Oh, and the music just gets faster and faster. It's so stressful. I did it once, got really close to beating her, and then I was like, I can't do this again, and I put it down for 2 days, and then I picked it up, and it took me only 3 tries, and I felt good about that.
Yeah,
but it's like, it made me feel too many feelings.
And the music for that fight is based on a Sevillian and like general like southern Spain form of flamenco that gets faster the longer it's played, so it's harder to dance to.
So cool.
And like her movement is like based on like flamenco dancing, on, like I said earlier, that like 16th, 15th century fencing, and her design is based on a very famous Spanish swordswoman who was a fencer as well. So you have that quiff, I can't say it properly, but the big frilly thing around the neck and like the robes and everything. If you look at like a blown up version of the sprite, it looks like an old fencing uniform.
Okay.
Oh,
wow.
So cool. Yeah. They and the other thing that took me a long time to learn in this game is that you should not just use the one weapon. Certain enemies are calibrated specifically to be fought with a specific
those
kind
guys
of
with the candelabras, if you're trying to just brute force it with the sensor, you're going to run into a lot of trouble. You need to parry them.
Yep.
Yes.
It's not going to stop me from just doing the same thing I always do because I am a creature of habit.
Even doubly so once you get... I can't remember what area you get to when you encounter the guys with the candelabras who do the 2 swipes, so one way and then backwards.
Oh, I hate them!
Yeah, you need the 2 blades
temples,
for that one.
I will say, of Ospina's like area, that has my favorite room in the game, which is the dinner table with the brother and sister.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's based on in Seville, but it sounds amazing, and I do want to know what it is. You walk into the room, and the first time I walked in, I don't know if it's randomized at the beginning, but when I walked in the first time, the sister was alive and the brother was dead. And then they both talk, and she talks to the brother as though he's still alive and he's hiding something that he's kept away from her that you will not find in that area. You'll find much later in the game. And then when you leave the room and come back, it'll be the other way around. She's dead and he's alive, and he's talking about something that belonged to her. And you can only return one of the 2 items, and then it's over. You can.
That is Goya. It's another Goya painting.
Okay.
When in doubt, if it's not folklore, it's Goya.
Okay. And so you have the dead sibling and the live sibling, and they're both kind of in this superposition of existence because of their sin, I suppose. And so every time you come back, and it's just so, because like they obviously one has killed the other in both cases.
Right.
Like, so they're both just like these nasty little horrible people who live in a place that's full of monsters and don't even seem to be totally aware of it because they're busy with dinner.
Well, let's move on now to talking a little bit about some of those other character interactions, because as we've said, once the rest of the map unlocks effectively, once you have the 3 weapons and you get more of these passive abilities, there's a lot of different things that you can do. There's a lot of side quests. There's just a lot of guys you can find. And I'm curious which ones of these jumped out at you in terms of the world building and narrative.
In terms of design, I loved finding the sisters because their name, and I'm not going to try and pronounce it again, is actually, is an old form of veiled dressing that women in southern Spain used to do, where you would you'd only leave one eye open, so that's why they're like a cyclops. I thought it was really cool.
The dead kids is also very interesting, where you have to kill all those kids and then go into their dreams and basically do like battle royale within them. The mother who's trying to get her son asleep, if you are able to like give her all the lullabies, you then go into a platforming challenge that is very
bullshit.
Similar. It's very similar to the first game. That is like their homage to those platforming levels in the first one. The one that surprised me, because I did not clock it, is there's an entire quest where you just do one of the prayers and it activates a symbol in the background of certain screens that you're in, and as the more of those symbols that you find, the more like currency that you unlock. It gives you like cash rewards basically for it. But they're very tricky to find. Like you have to really, really study the map.
You really have to Google them.
Yeah, you really do.
Who was your favorite like weird NPC quest lines? Because I personally I love Honeychrist.
Oh, Honeychrist is the best. The Goo Man himself.
Yeah, and that's actually based on so in Seville there was a statue of Christ that was apparently crying honey, and people thought it was like, oh, this is a miracle.
Huh.
What had happened was the statue was actually hollow, and bees had
were
formed
living
a
in
hive inside.
Oh, that's cool.
That's a miracle in its own way, though. You know, that's the way that God uses the world. I also loved Besamanos, who's like, you see floating hands with like these lace cuffs on them, and then this one is just like, oh yes, adore me, love me, and he
got some fervent kisses.
He increases your fervor when you deliver him kisses.
I like him. The very effeminate hands.
Yes.
Yeah.
And once you find everything, you get this this note at one point that is just like clearly written by someone very jealous, and someone is like, I need to get rid of them. I need to do something about them. I don't want them having all the adoration that I should have. And then you can go to the back of the chapel. This is after you've gotten every upgrade, so he's disappeared, and so have all of his kissers. And you go to the back of the chapel, which has been locked up until this point, and there's just a room full of all the other hands in the world, and they're all just like locked up in this prison.
It's like, what I love about all of this is that it doesn't actually do anything to find that room. It's just really cool world building. It just gives you a little extra that makes you so interested in what are the details of this, like what the fuck is going on here, and to a degree you have to fill out the backstory for yourself.
It's very like Dark Souls influence, like kind of Ludo narrative stuff, where it's like everything's told through text descriptions on items and it's kind of in the background. I love the Chalice lady as well, who upgrades your your health upgrades.
It's peeled away over time.
The way they flay away her skin as you get more and more health from her until she's eventually just a red skeleton who is unable to communicate with you anymore. So cool.
Yeah.
Also with the fervent kisses hand, I feel like, I don't think it's explicitly said, but I feel like that is a reference to like priests in pre kind of Protestant Europe, where obviously selling indulgences and adoration of the priest, and obviously they're kissing the hand, which before you would kiss the ring of the priest and kiss the ring of the Pope. It's that sort of thing.
It is so funny because a lot of the NPCs, again, Josh, as you were saying, they give you like little bonuses or things, but there are also some of them, like the Honey Christ guy gives you an ability, but I just never really used it. And he's like, well, come back if you need another one. I'm like, I never used the first one. Right. But it's just so fun to like find them and to be absorbed into this world.
I guess that's the question that I have is like, how does all of this make us feel? Just like, what is the feeling that you get from encountering all of these guys?
Just filled with goo. Like, you know, it has the same effect, honestly, of looking at a Goya painting, of just like seeing sort of this uncanny other world that is so macabre. But what the difference is that like every character in the game is so used to this shit that it kind of loses the horror element, at least for me. And that's not a bad thing. This is not like a criticism, but like I'm able to survive in this world that I wouldn't be able to survive in a Goya painting because everyone is just like, yeah, that's just kind of the way things are. You know, even the woman who's having her skin flailed back, she's just like, yeah, oh, hey, what's up? You have a chalice for me or something? And like her cherubs are ripping apart her skin.
I think, or the breastfeeding man.
That was the most fascinating to me as kind of that one felt like it was kind of linking a lot of the themes together. This guy who's raising this child that might not even be alive. It's a giant man with a giant baby, and he has taken somebody else's breast.
It's his wife.
And
he has cut his wife's breast off to show devotion to the miracle.
Okay.
And sewn it onto his body, and it is still lactating and producing milk, but he wants to leave now. And so you have to find these seeds of wax that will grow into people like seeds do.
Yep.
And then once you get, I think it's 7 sisters, he'll leave the baby behind. And once you go to that room, once he's gone and everything, that baby is not moving. I'm like, this is just a dead baby.
He's just doing the Daniel Day-Lewis, there will be blood. I've abandoned my boy.
But like
I
positive.
Think, I think like a really interesting thing. And it's like, I remember, I can't remember. It was our critic wrote about Goya's painting is like the beauty of Goya's painting is similar to the beauty of God, and that not all of God's creations are beautiful.
Yeah,
and it's like it's like this kind of also malicious but benign miracle that is like both cursing and blessing people, and very few people have been blessed, but most have been cursed. And it's and the interesting thing is that like so many of them have been cursed for no discernible reason at all. Like the breastfeeding man obviously did some transgression in terms of like cutting off his wife's breast, but like Honey Christ is like, he doesn't know why he is suffering, and that's the Catholicism right there.
Yeah, right is the unknowability of an unpredictable God that sometimes goes oopsie and causes a plague. This back half of the game it's so incredible because every level that you go to is just a new and interesting kind of like high fantastical experience. Like you climb this mysterious tower that just appears out of nowhere, and then you go down to the other corner of the map and see this tower that is in an inverted like honey goo tower, which is, I think that's probably my favorite level is the one immediately afterwards.
Yeah, well, and I really liked going up to that big tower, and I liked the little paintings that come out at you in 3D, which again felt very much
Super
like a Castlevania.
Symphony of the Night,
loved it. It was like, this is the library all over again.
That's a fun, because you play with a new mechanic, like a Super Mario Brothers 3 mechanic of a scrolling world where you go right and then you show up on the left side of the screen. Yeah. And so you have to figure out how to use dashes and everything to climb up the tower.
And that same mechanic is then used in the boss fight against Benedicta, which is pretty fun. You're dashing around, you're whacking guys, you're having a great time.
I'm just gonna say the chant that like fires the laser directly upwards just breaks the game. It's so fun.
It's also very expensive, that ability. I think it used to be cheaper and they patched it to be more expensive because it does absolutely break the game. You have a giant sky beam.
Yeah. But once you defeat Benedicta, you're on to the Sea of Ink. and this takes you to the sunken cathedral where there's even more goo. And
the dolphin wizards, I fucking hate.
Oh,
Oh god.
I did not
so
hate.
annoying.
I did not hate many enemies in this game. I fucking hated the dolphin casters. Like,
great design.
Yeah.
Horrible enemies.
And for
to
listeners who
fight.
have not played this game, they throw dolphins at you. That's
also the frogmen who jump out of the puddles.
Oh, yeah.
Infuriating.
yes.
Yeah, and those were from the original game as well. They had
Okay.
a version of the frogmen that appear in the Mother of Mothers in this game as well. But like, yeah, the fact that they can disappear really sucks because you can't hit them when they're down there.
Yeah.
But this takes you through to Odon, who is big and tanky and can dash around and can
glitched.
one-hit you.
Yeah.
And super glitched.
The first time you fight him is actually, it's one of those where like the boss appears, you fight a sort of weaker version of him, and then you do the real boss fight later. The first time he appears, he doesn't have a health bar.
Right.
And every enemy in this game has a health bar, right? There's the boss health bar that appears at the bottom, or a regular enemy has a bar above their head.
Right.
And at one point when I was fighting Ornstein and Smaug, I had two separate, I don't even know how to explain it, because they get 2 health bars by the end.
Yeah.
I had 4 health bars.
Yeah, there was like that. I had that
I had a
happen too,
doubling.
where it glitches and their
Yeah.
health bars are overlaid
And so
on
I
top
think
of each
that's
other.
supposed to be a glitch, but the first time I fought him, I'm like, I at least need to know how much progress I'm making.
Right.
Please give me that. But I don't think it's on purpose. And the second time that you fight him at the end, not always the case, but it was the case for me. There was A, no music, and B, he made no sounds.
Yep.
I made
His little
sounds.
minions. His
the
little minions,
minions made sounds. The rain makes a sound, which is very moody. It would work for a more subdued boss fight, but like he was just totally silent.
So this is where I'm going to make a full disclosure. This is the point that I couldn't get past.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that if I were to go at it for hours and hours, I would be able to. But I was on a deadline.
Yeah.
And so I did watch the rest of the game via a playthrough. This is the kind of thing where, I think they have chosen to make a game where players who are not up to a certain level of skill are going to find themselves hard blocked by this encounter.
I'm gonna say I have quit smoking at this stage, and I remember, I think it was when Bloodborne came out, and when I fought Ludwig, I sat there and chain smoked cigarettes while playing the game.
Yes.
For hours.
Yes. And that is, I think, probably the hardest boss in Bloodborne besides Orphan of Kos, who is the end of that DLC. But it is very intentionally difficult, and they did it for this game too. They made Adon harder because they patched in to make him harder because players were getting past him and getting wrecked by future bosses. And they're like, okay, so we have to actually give them a much more significant skill check here so that the rest of the game, they're not tearing their hair out.
Or
Adon kind of serves the same kind of purpose as Radahn in Elden Ring. It's like, okay, if you can't get past this, go grind and like get upgrades because you need to be this good. But I was beating my head against Odon, and I was like, you've seen me throughout this entire recording, I'm vaping nonstop. I was like, I need a fucking cigarette, and I like had to get up and go outside and walk to the shop, and then like walk back because I was like, I need to get out of the house. I'm not going to smoke. I just need to get some fresh air because I fucking hate this game right now.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's kind of bullshit because, again, the boss fights are different from the rest of the game.
Yeah.
And they're all like a big spike that comes in the game, where in Elden Ring, there are 238 bosses. So having to get good to fight Radahn makes a lot of sense because he's like maybe the 5th one that you'll fight.
Right.
In this game, there's 12 bosses, and Odon is like the fucking 8th. So you don't have a whole lot of bosses left. And I feel like it maybe just nerf a little bit more for the later bosses if that's becoming an issue, because you're certainly not going to be underleveled or underskilled to like go through, again, like the actual traversal part of the game.
Right.
Brian, were you able to make it past Odon?
Yes, I was.
Oh, okay.
The thing that finally did it for me was getting the chant that just has a big poison sensor that floats in the air, and you can just sort of spam that. And because he shoots out minions, people think the minions are there to make it harder. No, they're there to make it easier because you can get your fervor back up by hitting them.
Yeah.
And so then I would just keep shooting out that poison gas the whole time.
It's a really rough battle, but once you're through it, you're gonna beat the game. Oh, I'm sorry. I just saw that there's a penultimate boss that's impossible.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
We'll get to him later.
The next two bosses are, I think, the easiest that I fought in the game.
Significantly easier.
And especially Susona, who I fought in one try, not even realizing that I was about to beat her, and then I did it. She also, I think, has my favorite design. She's got the skull.
Oh, that's the floaty lady
with the
reliquary.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
Yeah, so she's based on a urban legend of, or maybe it's a real story, but of a lady who was like really, really beautiful, but also incredibly vain. So they crucified her and flayed her alive.
Whoa!
And put this like helmet over her. But the one that I hated the most was Synodo, who is like obviously a reference to synod, which is a meeting of bishops. So it's obviously like meant to be represented by that.
Yeah, and he's made up of multiple faces.
Yeah, and he has like different phases where he does different attacks, but the healing is so annoying because the window you have to deal enough damage in order to stop the healing, and the window is so small that the only way I could beat it is with the sky laser beam.
I liked the design of the changing of the faces. I thought was very fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, could be very annoying.
But yeah, Susona, again, my favorite design of a boss. Her face, because she was also, she's based on that story. She's also kind of based on Narcissus, right? She's staring at her reflection for so long that you end up getting a reflection of the castle. You see it in the background a long time before, where you're walking by an empty area, but the castle only appears in the lake.
That's
really cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
so cool. And then once you activate it, it appears above.
And then in the boss fight, her head is based on Mary Magdalene's skull, which is not Spanish. It's in France, but I was like, that's Mary Magdalene. Just kind of a fun fight. And I always like a boss fight that I can do once because, again, I'm me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, just like a cool bit of lore about Benedicta. I know we talked about her a couple of minutes ago. Is that
the platform boss, the ghost lady who throws the
So like the confraternity that Benedicta is from, essentially they are condemned to pray for recently dead bishops until they die, but for some reason she has been made eternal, so she is confined to praying for this bishop forever.
Oh boy.
So that's why like she is like a ghost.
It really is a good thing that you as El Penitente are putting these guys out of their misery.
Yeah,
like that's the FromSoft formula, right?
Yeah.
That's like there are a bunch of regal entities that have been alive so long that their lives are nothing but suffering, and it's your job to put them out of their misery. It's that thing that Miyazaki always says about his work, which is like he will often like critique people who are working on monster designs for the FromSoft games, saying, "Where's the dignity? Where is the dignity in this beast?
Also, where is the feet?" Like,
more. Could there be more feet?
No, but that's interesting because I think dignity and the idea of being dignified is also something that all of the boss characters in this game have in common. Right. You really feel an amount of empathy for them, which is remarkable, given that they are just, I mean, this is a pixel art game, right? There's not a great deal of actual detail that you can render beyond what is possible within the limited palette. It's not like they necessarily talk to you, but you feel a sense of this is a very emotional game, I think.
Yeah. Oh, immensely. Because, I mean, it does tie into those feelings of guilt that I think we all feel, right? And all these people, you know, especially if you've been in any sort of organized religion, Catholic or not, you understand the pains of giving yourself over to like a bigger power than you and how that can often fuck you over.
Yeah.
In very visceral ways.
And even in the like the world of the game, that almost all of the bosses that you are fighting are also serving their own form of penance. And in the game, obviously, penance is eternal until death. You are ending their penance, and literally that is what Evaturno like says, is that like, you know, his penance is over.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Evaturno, because he is the penultimate boss. He is a very dignified guy.
He's the first penitent.
That's right.
He's your papa.
And
well, not really. But,
it is your job to destroy him.
Yeah. In order to get to him, you have to climb up through this thing called the Crimson Ruins, which is just like
bullshit.
Bullshit. It's just
bullshit area.
It's thorns and it's raining blood. It's heavy. It's metal as fuck, but it's also it's
very
such a
like
slog.
it's the last level. It's supposed to be hard, right?
Yeah.
Another one of my most hated enemies throughout the entire game was the teleporting like dual sword wielding cardinals. And like if you try and go past them, they will follow you the whole way through. It is infuriating.
Yeah, they also have the guys who shoot the 4 like orbs of energy at you and then follow it up with a big swing, which it took me a long time to figure out that it's just a duck jump situation to dodge that, and then a block at the end. They will decimate your health, and especially when you're dying on platforming on the way up, to have to then refight them every time is just grueling.
Yeah. But there are shortcuts. There are shortcut platforms, which I would keep forgetting about.
Yes, and those do help. But eventually you get to the top, the tippy top, and you go in and you fight Evaturno, and he is... he's a 2-phase boss fight that is actually 5 phases. The first one you can eventually get through like a lot of like 2-phase from soft bosses. You fight him so much that you're able to get through the first part pretty easily and pretty unscathed by the time you're actually able to beat him.
He is difficult. He's fast and he's got a lot going on.
Yeah, he's got a lot of projectiles in that first stage. But then you realize that you can't beat him unless you have mastered the parry mechanic, which I just had not used on my first playthrough at all for any enemy.
He picks up the sword from the character from the first game that we're not going to get into, but she did bring you back at the beginning of this one.
Yeah.
So Chrysanta, who, if you play the Wounds of Eventide, like, is responsible for you killing God.
Yeah.
And her and Deus Gracias like bring you back. Also, at the very start of this game, Deus Gracias is holding the coffin that you were in for 1,000 years and has turned to stone.
Yeah.
And like in this second phase with Evaturno, he takes the mea culpa out of Chrysanta's chest because she impales herself at the very start of the game and beats your ass with it.
Yeah. And as the fight goes on, he just keeps adding like an extra 2 moves to each and every combo. So you're going to die a lot to this guy. But there's a moment like near the end, I think it was like the halfway mark, where he then summons every single boss you fought so far
he goes
to do a single attack.
Game Master Anthony on your ass. Yeah.
It is so cool.
Again, I did not actually get to this point playing the game.
Right.
But when I saw that, I was like, oh man, I have to imagine experiencing this in gameplay feels emotional in a way, in much the same way that we talked about in Chrono Trigger, right?
Yeah.
There's toward the very end when you are effectively refighting past bosses. There's something about that sense of accomplishment of like, I've been here before and now I'm at the ultimate challenge. That's really exciting.
For me, the emotion was, come on!
Yeah, and that is the other thing too, right? Like, you can watch it and be like, this is the coolest thing you've ever seen, but the way they've calibrated the attacks is also very interesting because each individual one isn't very strong. All of them together will kill you.
Sure.
But it is more about sitting back and watching the effect until fucking Evaturno comes back and does a big screen-wide swipe that will kill you instantly if you don't
honestly,
dodge it.
like when I eventually got to that part where he summons all of the previous bosses, I died immediately, and I just like put the controller down and I was like, I can't even be mad at this. Like, this is so cool.
It is so cool. And it is also actually, I think it reflects a lot of the game, which is that you're supposed to get hit
And I think that's a thing that a lot of people, when it comes to these very hard games, they're like, I just keep getting hit all the time. I feel like I'm failing. And it's like, you are supposed to fail. You are il penitente. You are supposed to be receiving the lashes. That is your character. Yeah. That is how you achieve nirvana.
Your helmet is literally filled with thorns facing inwards, sticking into your head.
Yeah. And it does make it, I swear, when I finally beat him after, I think, several days of battling him, because I needed to take breaks, I got that sense that I get when I beat a really hard boss in a FromSoft game. I leapt to my feet. I cheered. I was like, yeah, I felt invincible for a moment. And then you find out the game's not over. Oopsie, there's one more fucking boss.
Brian, were you able to beat Eviterno?
No.
Okay.
Because I played with the sensor the whole game.
And it just can't block. You just can't block with it.
I can't fucking parry it for shit in any game that has ever been made. It's an ability that I will never have, and I've come to terms with that, and I just need game developers to also come to terms with it.
Make more games for Brian.
They make so many games for me. It's
they only make a few games for me. But when they do, I appreciate them greatly.
I would say, Josh, that you're very devoted to those games. Much like, I don't know, perhaps Devotion Incarnate, the final boss of Blasphemous 2.
The second coming. Again, that first child didn't work out so much.
No.
And that first child helped you, like, get all of the pieces that you need to destroy the second child. But this second child is coming and he's bringing the sword.
Yeah, God, much like parenting, if you fuck up the first child, just have another one. That will solve everything.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of an implication here, too, that maybe the child popped out before he was fully baked.
Yeah, like, you got there too soon,
Because when you cut down Eviterno, the big heart that contains the child within it, in a fully animated cutscene, which is very cool, by the way.
Oh, I love them in these
He
games,
just fucking... Plop, he falls out of the heart and plops down onto the floor, and he's grotesque looking.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, Tom, we're talking Bloodborne earlier. He looks like the Orphan of Cause.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like this sort of abomination, half god, half human thing that does not want to live and doesn't understand his purpose.
Yeah, he's very sci-fi.
Going to find it through you.
Yeah, he's very like, why was I created? What is my purpose?
You will teach me by me shooting all these lasers at you. And so you have a fight that is ultimately easier than Eviterno by degrees. It is a big spectacle fight. And once you're able to put him down, one of two things will happen. Most likely, if you've just done the default game and not collected all the cherubs, which... Oh, man, that to me felt like a chore.
I missed 3 cherubs, and I was like, I'm not going to find them. I'm not going to do this.
I did end up tracking them down just so I could see what ending A was, but it was a chore.
Did you use Google?
I put on a podcast. Yeah, I did. Yeah.
I'm just going to say, for 2 months, I played this game in preparation for this podcast like it was my job.
Yes!
I did everything.
Oh, wow. I'm still at 99%. I can't find whatever room I haven't gotten into yet. I don't know where that is.
How did you feel about Cherub Collection, Tom?
It was fine, because, like, essentially what I would do when I got a new, like, movement upgrade, or, like, when you get the upgrade for, like, the hanging cherubs with the rings, I would just, like, go back through all the areas. And that was kind of the easiest way to do it. Like, there's a couple of them where, like, they're platforming challenges, which are kind of annoying. There's maybe like 2 of them that I just like probably took about an hour each to get, but they were just like,
they're really clever. They're kind of, those were my favorite, were the platforming puzzles in this game. Those were my favorite parts of the whole game.
I suppose a compliment to FromSoft games and this game is that, like, it never felt unfair or like it was broken. It was like, okay, I know I can do this. I just need to get the timing right.
Yeah. And then sometimes there's a cherub hidden behind a piece of scenery in the foreground that then if you move a little to the right, you'll see it. And those to me were always the ones where I'm like, of course, that's the one I missed.
Because I did that. I did my chores. I did my thing every time I got an upgrade to go around the map and get every place that I'd marked. And, and there's just 3 I don't have. And it would have just been like, because I had to do this with the sisters too, where I had to like Google and then like go and find all the rooms of the ones I did find and then find the ones that I didn't. I wasn't going to do that for 33 cherubs.
Well, and that's the thing, right? In order to get like the good ending, you have to do all of this shit. You have to do your chores.
Yeah.
Yes, because if you don't, after you've defeated the Devotion Incarnate, you get mortally wounded, and Devotion is like, oh, that's my purpose in life. It's to use you to bring back the miracle.
Yeah, it's like actually the miracle... or the child of the miracle is only one half of the equation, and you having to mortally wound it yourself is the other half. And so
this actually this ties in with the first game in that like when you complete the DLC is you have been manipulated the whole way through by the miracle to do what it wants.
Right. And so you have to fuse together at the end, and then you will both become a great big tree, which is the dawning of a new age of the miracle.
Mm-hmm.
This is very similar to the ending of Deus Ex where you merge with the AI.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it is the default ending. It is also the bad ending. It is ending B.
Yeah, if you do the fusion dance with God's big baby, you get the bad ending.
There will be no dancing with babies.
I'm God's big baby. Gotta love me.
There we go.
But if you do end up doing everything and you manage to burn all of the idols and get the incense, you are able to light that incense before you go and fight Devotion.
Mm-hmm.
And after the battle, Devotion's like, oh, actually, the miracle is evil. And the only way that we can actually save the world is if I choose to die.
Right.
Yeah.
So Devotion Incarnate chooses to die, and then Annunciata, I believe is her name, who has been sort of guiding you through
she's
this
an
whole
angel
quest.
from the mountains on high.
She comes down and she's like, hey, you saved the world, so guess what? You get to die now.
Yeah.
Right.
You get to go to heaven.
You see all your friends as you're ascending.
Yeah, and it's not just friends from this game, it's friends from the first game as well. So you got
Deus
nice
Gracias is scratching his nuts in the background like he did in the first game.
Yeah, it's really lovely.
The heaven in this is called the ancient canvas of light and time. As always, everything is art and everything is specifically Goya, and you are thrust into the great big Goya painting that will never grow old.
By the way, you know who else willingly died to lift an ancient curse that was placed upon humanity by his heavenly father?
Josh has flipped his chair around.
Dale Earnhardt?
No, Dale Earnhardt Jr.
Oh, shit.
He's passed away at time of recording.
So you, so you make it through all the credits, and it's like, oh, you've won Blasphemous II. But the very end, the Penitente's scarf breezes past the camera.
The wrap around the sword that didn't exist. Yeah. Ooh, DLC.
It's coming down the track. And that is Blasphemous 2. Yeah, so the Game Kitchen, as we said, have announced that something is happening this fall that will add on to the Blasphemous story in some way. And it kind of has to if there's going to be a Blasphemous 3, just because just such a definitive ending the ending A is for this one that like I don't foresee the franchise going forward if that is the canon default ending. But that's not all that Game Kitchen is working on. They're also working on a stealth RTS game.
Yeah. What the fuck?
Okay.
That's a thing that just doesn't exist.
Is something I want to play.
Yeah.
That sounds cool as hell.
Because I love my stealth turn-based strategy games. Okay. I love my Metal Gear Acid, my Phantom Doctrines.
Well, and it makes it such an exciting studio because like the major 3 games that they have made are all completely different from each other.
Yeah, they've got like a VR board game that they have too.
Yeah, and it's just like they're always so exciting to watch because the next thing will always be different, unless it's Blasphemous 3, which let's be real, there will probably be a Blasphemous 3
probably a little
at
down
some
the line,
point. But they are always challenging themselves, and it always seems like they are trying to pursue the things that they are most interested in, and are never going to return to the days where they are just doing gaming content for guns for hire.
Yeah, they're not going to be making things woke anymore.
Thank God.
Absolutely not. So just some questions here to wrap as we're starting to wrap up here. Tom, this is a question for you. What is it about Catholicism that makes it such a fertile ground for video games?
I mean, it's funny because I recently was on Corner Spady, the podcast about European politics, talking about why online Catholic converts are a thing. And I think part of it is that there's so much kind of like cultural, artistic, historical ephemera that just are in the ether around Catholicism. Like, it has a very defined visual aesthetic. It has like a very kind of rich and sordid history in Europe. It like has permeated and permutated so many times that like there's so much stuff that can be done with it. And also like I suppose the foundational story of like Christ is like worked so much into narrative just generally. Like, how many movies or books have you seen or read? It's like, oh, this is just Jesus.
Yeah.
And what I think they did with Blasphemous 1 and 2 is they took the core framing of it and did something really interesting with it. And I think like even just like they were just pulling from Goya, who's like, art isn't necessarily really religious, but like working it into a narrative that has this kind of subtle commentary on religion. And it's like, I think that's what's making it interesting for people to like pull from different things. You know, like I suppose like the story of Christ is the foundational myth of the West, and every other story has taken bits from it since, in one way or another. And that's just, I think it's a familiar narrative structure that like works for people. I want to see people make, I don't know, do a game about evil Jesus, which I suppose this game is kind of about evil Jesus.
Right. You just murder him and you're not playing as evil Jesus. I think that also, just the idea of like that you fail and then keep trying again over and over again, that feels very Catholic to me. And I feel like in video games, that's the whole thing, right? You die, you come back. You die, you come back. And every time you just chip a little bit away at the wall. And in theory, that's how Catholicism is supposed to work. You fuck up, you go get confession, you do your penance for it, you learn from that mistake, and then you don't necessarily repeat that behavior in the future.
Well, and I think this is undergirded by the mechanics too. One thing that's a big difference between this game and Castlevania Symphony of the Night is that although you die and die frequently, your actual progress is never lost. Yes, you're going to respawn at the last place that you saved, but you're still going to have the portion of the map that you revealed up until that point. And I think that's meaningful.
And your currency.
Right.
Which is also a huge sort of breaking off point from Dark Souls and from the FromSoft games. It's like it doesn't want to penalize you, you know, in terms of your progress of the game, because it doesn't want you to stop playing the game if you have a big major loss. And that sort of pivots into my next question, which is like Blasphemous 1 is also very much a Metroidvania. It is not as much so as the sequel. And it seems as though that was done to sort of do like appeal to a broader audience. But what is it about these Metroidvanias that appeal to such a wide audience, do we think?
I would kind of say that like it is a formula that works. Like I suppose we've seen like the revival of the modern Metroidvania with, you know, Dark Souls 1 in 2011, if I'm getting my years right.
Something like that,
Yeah, I feel like some people will get mad at me for saying Dark Souls 1 is a Metroidvania, but
I mean, it kind of is.
Well, but you can look at other examples too. I mean, Hollow Knight being the most obvious, you know.
Most Legend of Zelda games are also Metroidvanias. They're just not side-scrolling. Right. But it's the same thing where you can walk around the world. You'll find things that you can't surpass, and then you'll get the thing that lets you go past it. And so you remember. And I think that's part of it. It's like it's the fun of exploring and the fun of remembering and solving the world that you're in.
Yeah, I think that kind of sense of non-linear progression really appeals to people in the sense of like it leads to this greater sense of achievement because it's like you have figured it out rather than I have gone linearly from one area to the next, beat this boss, then done this thing. And I think the kind of obtuseness of most Metroidvanias, especially modern ones, makes that sense of achievement so much better. And also I think the community that always sprouts up around these games is great because like you can be stuck on something and you'll find a Reddit thread about it, or you'll see people talking about it, and like the them being difficult and challenging either in terms of combat or exploration or platforming makes these games so fun to play because they're actually rewarding for doing something, whereas most linear games, you are following a predefined path. You have just done what you've been told to, rather than a lot of these games reward you for thinking smart and thinking outside the box and doing something a lot of times that the people who made the games didn't even expect. And that sort of sense of discovery is what's really fun. And I think, you know, if you look at games appealing to like this kind of sense of wonder of the people playing them, I think that is what really appeals to people, is like, you are doing something in this world that you're not being told to do. You're being rewarded for being smart, for being creative, and it's a rewarding experience that people enjoy. And I think that's why Metroidvanias have such an enduring legacy in games.
Well, Tom, to the point of reward and wonder, it's been a rewarding experience having you on the show.
And a wonder.
And I wonder if...
Oh, shit. Incredible segue.
Yeah, thank you. Best in the biz, baby. And I was wondering if there's anything that you would like to tell our audience about, if they want to follow you around, if they'd like to listen to more stuff from you, because this really has been an absolute treat.
So my own show is Beneath the Skin. It is a art and cultural history show. It's telling the story of the world through the history of tattooing. So, for example, an episode we did a couple of years ago when we started the show talked about the story of the Siberian ice princess called Akibala, who was discovered in the 90s when Russian archaeologists were walking around pouring hot water into the permafrost. And they poured it in and they got the smell of fresh lamb. And what had happened was this body was buried underneath the permafrost with a sacrificial meal, with horses, and had been buried by the Altai people about 2,000 years ago. And someone had been buried above them. So when, either through an act of desecration or preservation, we don't really know. So when grave robbers came along, they robbed the above grave and left the one below.
Wow.
But where the story gets interesting is when she was discovered, she was carted away to, you know, a university museum in Moscow. And the Altai region is an autonomous region in Russia. And in order to get this body, which is of important both, you know, cultural and spiritual importance to the Altai people, they had to agree for Gazprom to build a pipeline through their region.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So if you want to hear stories like that, listen to Beneath the Skin. It's not just about tattoos. If you have them, we do have episodes where we talk directly about them.
Yeah.
But it's about the cultural importance and historical importance of tattoos as an artistic medium.
Yeah.
And the other show that I host is, I'm a co-host and producer on Lines Led by Donkeys. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are probably familiar with it. Military history show where we talk about military failures, dudes rock moments, and we have now started watching Gundam.
Hell yeah! Let's go.
Yeah.
So we were watching the 1994 classic G Gundam, which is probably the most hated franchise in the entire property. And we do fun stuff like that. And I'm also the producer of Glue Factory, a video comedy podcast from some of the crew at Trash Future. No theme, just riffs. So if you want a tight 40 minutes of some of the best comedians in the game riffing, watch Glue Factory. I'm on an upcoming episode.
Well, and I saw Glue Factory. Y'all had Zach Zucker on recently. I just saw his stand-up show like last week. Really, funny stuff. And check all of it out. We've got the links down in the show notes. And Tom, thank you again so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me on. It was an absolute pleasure.
We also have a Patreon, for what it's worth. We being the worst of all possible worlds, the show that you're listening to right now.
If you want to be smart and you want to be rewarded for being smart, all you need to do is give us $5 a month. And you get countless. You can't actually count them. They're numbered.
You can count them.
Premium
but the number keeps
episodes.
growing.
Yes. Full length, 2 to 3 hour episodes about all the topics that we cover every other week.
Yeah, including some stuff that we talked about today. So go check that out as well. Patreon.com/worstofall is where you will find it.
If you give us $5, we guarantee you will go to heaven. We will put
a
good word with God.
Yep.
It's a Catholic episode. I had to do it. I had to do it to him.
No, why don't you indulge us?
Yeah, I had to.
But yeah, AJ, you want to bring us home?
Yes, absolutely. So, I think the wonder of this game is that it is able to sort of be parallel to Catholicism and yet never fully become it and never sort of fall deeply into that swamp. It is a gorgeous, gorgeous platformer. It is a tough as nails combat game. It is something that I think I will remember my playing experience with it for a long time. And I think its greatest accomplishment, at least in my head, is that it does what every great Goya painting does, which is, as you said, Tom, it captures all the beauty of God's creation, and it's not always beautiful. I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
And I'm the worst of all possible Joshes. See you next week.